Bloodborne has one of the most layered, strange, and quietly devastating lore libraries in all of gaming, and this video is my attempt to walk through as much of it as possible. In one sitting, covering hunters, great ones, the healing church, the Pthumerian, civilization, and 100 other threads that the game leaves dangling in the dark. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. I put this together because I kept running into the same problem when researching Bloodborne lore online. Most videos focus on one area, one boss, one faction. I wanted something that could just run in the background and cover the full picture. When assembling this, I made a deliberate choice to present things as interpretation rather than fact, because honestly, From Software never hands you a clean answer. Everything here is a reading of the evidence, not a definitive verdict. I also chose to follow a loose chronological structure, moving from the oldest known history forward, because that felt like the most honest way to let the world reveal itself. Some things I excluded entirely, like the Chalice Dungeon side lore, because that alone could fill another 8 hours. What you're getting here is the main world, the main mystery, and the facts buried inside it. Chapter 1. The World Before the Hunt. Fact 1. Yharnam is a city built on layers. The streets you walk through during the hunt are not the original settlement. Beneath them lie older districts, older architecture, older graves. Fact 2. The Pthumerians were a civilization that existed long before Yharnam became what it is in the game. They are described in item descriptions as having unlocked the secrets of the old labyrinth. Fact 3. The labyrinths referenced throughout the game are almost certainly the Chalice Dungeons, ancient ruins that exist beneath the city and beneath the known world. Fact 4. The Pthumerians are believed to have made contact with Great Ones, entities, from another plane of existence, long before the Healing Church ever began their experiments. Fact 5. The Choir and the Healing Church claim credit for discovering the Old Blood, but the Pthumerians suggest this discovery is far older than any Yharnamite institution. Fact 6. The Pthumerian Queen Yharnam appears in the game as a boss in the Chalice Dungeons. She is heavily pregnant, and the lore around her suggests she bore a child that was either a great one or something close to one. Fact 7. The child she carries is connected to a ritual that the Healing Church would later attempt to replicate, according to how the lore around the Orphan of Kos and the umbilical cords appears to point. Fact 8. 3 of the 4 umbilical cords in the game are required to unlock the true ending. Each one represents a connection to a great one or a being born from one. Fact 9. The Pthumerians themselves were eventually destroyed, though the exact cause is left open. The dungeons they built still hum with a strange energy, populated by their descendants and their experiments gone wrong. Fact 10. Bloodletting beasts and other dungeon enemies suggest that Pthumerian experiments with the old blood began long before the main game's events, and that things went badly then too. Fact 11. The architecture of the Chalice Dungeons is deliberately uniform and ritualistic. This was not a civilization that stumbled into power. They engineered a relationship with the cosmos. Fact 12. The word Pthumeru suggests an ancient Near Eastern or Sumerian influence in the naming, which aligns with the game's interest in ancient, pre-modern ways of engaging with the divine. Fact 13. Pthumerian descendants still exist in the dungeons, dressed in ceremonial robes, still performing rites that have long since lost their original meaning. Fact 14. The great ones that the Pthumerians worshipped are ambiguous in their nature. They are not presented as evil exactly. They are presented as alien, indifferent, and operating on a scale humans cannot fully register. Fact 15. Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos, is one of the great ones found in the game's world. She is described as having been left behind, abandoned, suggesting great ones do not always stay. Fact 16. The fact that great ones can be abandoned, can be left behind, is one of the stranger implications of the lore. It suggests they have motivations that include departure. Fact 17. Blood ministration is the core economic and religious practice of Yharnam. By the time the game begins, foreigners come from all over the world seeking treatments. For illness. Fact 18. The old blood does have healing properties. That is not in dispute within the game's fiction. The problem is what else it does over time. Fact 19. Prolonged exposure to the old blood leads to the scourge of the beast, a degenerative transformation that turns humans into animal-like monsters called beasts. Fact 20. The Healing Church knows this. This is not a secret within the institution. The debate internally is whether this cost is worth the benefits, or whether the transformation is simply the next stage. Fact 21. Lawrence, the first vicar of the Healing Church, was a student of Gehrman. Before he founded the church, he brought the old blood from the dungeons to the surface world. Fact 22. Lawrence appears in the game as a boss in the Dielk. He has transformed into a cleric beast, a massive flaming creature, and seems to be in torment. Fact 23. His skull appears in the Hunter's Nightmare earlier in the Delk, where it can be used in a ritual. The skull weeps, which suggests awareness and suffering. Fact 24. The Hunter's Nightmare is a separate plane where hunters who gave in to bloodlust or failed to control themselves are trapped in an endless hunt. It is, essentially, a hell for hunters. Fact 25. The nightmare is presided over by Clockwork Orange. Comparisons aside, it is run by Murgo's wet nurse in terms of cosmic function, but Ludwig is its most recognizable trapped figure. Fact 26. Ludwig the Holy Blade was the first hunter of the church and the founder of the church's hunter branch. He idolized Gehrman without ever having met him properly. Fact 27. He created the trick weapons that define the game's combat system by modelling them on what he imagined Gehrman's tools looked like. He never had access to the real thing. Fact 28. When you find Ludwig in the Hunter's Nightmare, he has transformed into a monster so complete that he has forgotten he was ever human. Defeating him partially restores his memory. Fact 29. If you show him the guidance rune, he dies at peace, believing the old ways of the hunter still exist. It is one of the game's most affecting moments. Fact 30. The Healing Church divided into factions over time. The main church focused on blood ministration and managing the populace. The choir worked in secret on cosmic communion. Fact 31. The research hall and the astral clock tower in the DLC are choir facilities, where patients were experimented on in attempts to elevate human consciousness towards something the great ones could perceive. Fact 32. Lady Maria of the astral clock tower was a hunter who worked at the facility. When she discovered what was being done to the patients, she sealed herself in the tower and refused to leave. Fact 33. Maria is Gehrman's student, and possibly his most talented one. She slashed her own wrists and threw her weapon into the well below rather than continue to participate. Fact 34. She still guards the tower after death, not out of malice, but because she cannot let go of her guilt. Her boss fight is one of the most technically demanding and narratively rich in the game. Fact 35. The fishing village of the DLC is the location where the choir conducted their most extreme experiments, culminating in the death of Kos, a great one who washed ashore there. Fact 36. Kos is never directly seen alive in the game. By the time the player arrives, she is dead on the shore, her body enormous and pale, halfway between sea creature and something else entirely. Fact 37. The orphan of Kos emerges from her body when you approach. He is her child, born posthumously, screaming, carrying what appears to be her placenta as a weapon. Fact 38. The villagers of the fishing hamlet worshipped Kos and were transfigured by her presence, gaining inhuman eyes, becoming something between human and sea creature themselves. Fact 39. The choir killed Kos, harvested her blood and the eyes of the villagers, and left. The orphan of Kos is the result of that violence, a being of grief and rage trapped in a nightmare. Fact 40. The DLC's final boss in one reading is the manifestation of Kos's curse, the nightmare itself given form. In another reading, it is simply the hunter who led the raid, preserved in the dream. Fact 41. Gehrman himself is a figure of profound tragedy. He created the hunters, dream as a workshop and safe haven, but he is also its prisoner, bound there by the moon presence. Fact 42. The moon presence is a great one that made a pact with Gehrman. The exact terms of the pact are never spelled out, but the result is that Gehrman cannot die and cannot leave. Fact 43. He spends his time in the dream in a wheelchair, watching hunters come and go, unable to free them unless they are killed at their request. He is a warden who cannot leave his own prison. Fact 44. The doll in the hunter's dream was modelled after Lady Maria. Gehrman had a fixation on her that the game treats with careful ambiguity. The doll is not Maria, and the game knows you know that. Fact 45. The plain doll herself is a strange being. She was made by Gehrman, presumably as a companion, but she has developed something that functions like genuine feeling over the years. Fact 46. She thanks you for feeling something, for sharing any emotion with her. She seems genuinely moved by the possibility of connection, which makes her one of the gentler presences in the game. Fact 47. The moon presence only appears in the game's final confrontation if you have consumed 3 umbilical cords, otherwise Gehrman simply kills you and you wake up. In Yharnam, a new day, the hunt ongoing. Fact 48. If you are killed by Gehrman without the umbilical cords, the ending shows you waking up in the real world, cured or escaped. It is, in some readings, the best ending for the ordinary hunter. Fact 49. The umbilical cord ending, which leads to fighting the moon presence, results in you becoming an infant great one under Gehrman's care, which is not clearly positive for anyone involved. Fact 50. The world of Bloodborne operates on a theory of consciousness and perception. The more you understand, the more you can perceive. The more you perceive, the more the world changes around you. Chapter 2. The Healing Church and its Secrets. Fact 51. The Healing Church was founded in Yharnam following Lawrence's return from the Pthumerian ruins. He brought with him knowledge of the old blood and a vision for what it could do. Fact 52. The church initially presented itself as a medical institution. Blood transfusions, using the old blood, could cure illness, close wounds, and restore vitality in ways conventional medicine could not. Fact 53. This is why foreigners travel to Yharnam. The game begins with your character arriving specifically to receive blood ministration for an unspecified illness. Fact 54. The Healing Church operates out of the Cathedral Ward, a grand district that visually dominates the city. The architecture is Gothic and imposing, clearly designed to project authority. Fact 55. Below the Cathedral Ward is Old Yharnam, a district that was burned down. After the beast scourge broke out there, the church set fire to it and never acknowledged what happened. Fact 56. Dura, an old hunter found in Old Yharnam, refuses to abandon the beasts. There, he argues, they are still people, still deserving of some protection. He is given up hunting. Fact 57. You can befriend Dura by approaching him without killing the beasts below. He gives you the powder keg badge and tells you what he knows about the old hunters. Fact 58. The powder kegs were a splinter group of hunters who favoured explosive and unconventional weapons. The church disapproved of them. They were eventually disbanded. Fact 59. The church controlled not just the blood supply, but the flow of information about the beast scourge. Outsiders were told it was under control. It was not. Fact 60. The suspicious beggar in the Forbidden Woods is one of the more disturbing optional encounters. He presents as a desperate outsider, but transforms and begins killing NPCs if allowed to roam. Fact 61. He is almost certainly one of the church's failed experiments, or a product of the beast plague that has not yet fully transformed. The game does not confirm which. Fact 62. The Vilebloods are a faction the church actively hunts. They are based in Canehurst Castle, a noble family who obtained a different kind of blood, one the church considers corrupt. Fact 63. Canehurst blood is described as of unknown origin, aristocratic, and predatory. The Vilebloods feed on others and are immortal in their current state. Fact 64. Queen Annalise of the Vilebloods is one of the game's optional NPCs. She sits on her throne and asks you to bring her the blood of nobles, which she consumes. She is entirely calm about this. Fact 65. The Executioners are a church-aligned faction whose entire purpose is hunting Vilebloods. Their leader, Alfred, is introduced early in the game as an enthusiastic ally. Fact 66. Alfred's questline ends with him murdering Queen Annalise in a way that is both thorough and disturbing. He is elated afterward, having fulfilled his purpose. Fact 67. You can revive Annalise using her remains at the Altar of Despair in the Dielk. She will admonish you and resume her place on the throne as if nothing happened. Fact 68. Alfred's fate, depending on player choices, can end with him becoming hollow. In the emotional sense, having completed the only goal that defined him, he has nothing left. Fact 69. This is a recurring theme in the game. Characters defined entirely by purpose tend to fall apart once that purpose is achieved or denied. Fact 70. The choir, the upper branch of the Healing Church, believed that the beast scourge was actually a necessary step, not a disease to be cured, but a transformation to be managed. Fact 71. Their research into the Great Ones went beyond what the lower church sanctioned. They were attempting actual communion, attempting to speak to entities that do not perceive humans the way humans perceive each other. Fact 72. The Altar of Despair, introduced in the DLC, is a choir facility. The name tells, you something about the mood within that branch of the church. Fact 73. Micolash, host of the Nightmare, is a choir scholar who chose to enter the Nightmare voluntarily. He sought arcane knowledge so badly that he refused to wait for it to come to him. Fact 74. You chase Micolash through a maze in his boss fight. He runs, taunts, and laughs. He has clearly been in the Nightmare long enough that his mind has become something else. Fact 75. His dialogue, while erratic, is actually coherent arcane scholarship. He quotes church texts and calls out to Kos for eyes. He wants what the choir always wanted. Contact. Fact 76. Arcane in the game's stat system represents knowledge of the cosmos, the Great Ones, and the old Pthumerian arts. It is the church's highest aspiration made into a combat stat. Fact 77. The Augur of Ebrietas, an arcane spell, essentially borrows the hand of Ebrietas herself to strike enemies. The church harvested and catalogued these techniques. Fact 78. Ebrietas herself is found beneath the Grand Cathedral in a hidden area called the Altar of Despair, not the DLC one, but an equivalent space beneath the main games. Cathedral. Fact 79. She is the only Great One in the game who does not attack immediately. She bows to you when you enter, which suggests she recognizes something in the player, or is simply mourning. Fact 80. Her description says the choir stumbled upon her when they found the old labyrinth, and that she was left behind. The church built a relationship with her, but it is unclear how mutual that relationship is. Fact 81. The Healing Church's workshops, separate from the Hunter's workshop, produced the weapons and clothing the church hunters used. They favoured holy tools and fire. Fact 82. Fire is treated as the natural counter to beasts throughout the game. The flame sprayer, Molotov cocktails, and the boom hammer all reflect the church's doctrine on how to handle transformation. Fact 83. This is not just practical. Fire has theological significance in the church. Purification by flame is a recurring concept in their texts and their architecture. Fact 84. The cathedral ward's lanterns, the burning symbols, and the fire pots carried by church hunters all reflect a worldview where light and fire are moral as much as practical tools. Fact 85. Simon the Harrowed, met in the DLC, is a hunter who was blinded by the church for asking too many questions. He found his way into the nightmare anyway. Fact 86. He is not bitter exactly, he is resigned. He gives you information freely and asks for very little in return. He is one of the more likeable presences in the DLC. Fact 87. The church's treatment of people like Simon points to a systematic pattern. Those who discover inconvenient truths about the blood or the experiments are either silenced or disappeared. Fact 88. Yharnam as a city is described by visiting characters as insular and unwelcoming to outsiders under normal circumstances. The blood ministration is the only reason foreigners are tolerated. Fact 89. By the time the game begins, the city has locked itself down, the hunt is on, the gates are closed, and citizens have been told to stay indoors. The church has lost control. Fact 90. The reason the hunt begins on the night the game takes place is never completely explained. Something triggered it. The pale blood moon is rising. The cosmic forces are converging. Fact 91. The imposter Iosefka, who takes over the clinic early in the game, is a choir member running experiments on any refugees sent her way. She turns them into celestial beings. Fact 92. Celestial beings in this context are humans who have been transformed into slug-like creatures that the choir considers elevated. Whether those people experience it that way is another question. Fact 93. The real Yharnam can be found much later, having been experimented on herself. She dies shortly after the player finds her and can drop an umbilical cord in a reading that suggests she too was transformed. Fact 94. The note left by Yharnam at the beginning of the game, before the imposter takes over, is warm and concerned. The contrast with what the clinic becomes is deliberate. Fact 95. The healing church, in the end, is not presented as simply villainous. It is presented as an institution that started with genuine belief and genuine results, and then built a tower of rationalizations to protect that belief. Fact 96. That tower eventually collapsed. The blood that was supposed to heal became the source of a plague. The communion that was supposed to elevate became a horror show. Fact 97. And almost everyone inside the institution, at every level, seems to have known something was wrong for a long time. They just kept going. Fact 98. Rom the vacuous spider is a great one, or close to one, that the choir created from a human scholar. She sits beneath Moonside Lake maintaining an illusion that hides the celestial moons from ordinary sight. Fact 99. Killing Rom lifts the veil. The world changes. The moons in the sky become visible and the streets fill with new horrors. This is not a metaphor. The world literally changes when you kill her. Fact 100. Rom does not attack initially. She needs to be provoked. She is described as vacuous, empty, as if the transformation took her mind, but she is not cruel. She is simply there, maintaining her function. Chapter 3. Hunters, Blood, and the Cost of the Craft. Fact 101. Gehrman is the original hunter. He developed the hunter's craft before the Healing Church was formally established, working alongside Lawrence in the early period of blood research. Fact 102. His weapon, the burial blade, is the only trick weapon in the game that exists as a legendary artifact of the original craft. Every other technique descends from or adapts his work. Fact 103. The trick weapon system, the ability to transform a weapon between modes, is Gehrman's invention. It defines the game's feel, and it is canonically something he developed. Fact 104. Hunter attire in the game clusters around factions. Church hunters wear white and black. Old hunters favour leather and practicality. The Dilk introduces a wider range of historical styles. Fact 105. The hunter's mark, the symbol used as the game's bonfire equivalent, is a rune that allows hunters to return to the hunter's dream. It appears burned into their skin. Fact 106. Being a hunter in Yharnam is not a freely chosen profession for most people. Many are drafted, recruited under pressure, or simply turn to the craft when their town is overrun. Fact 107. The League, introduced in the DLC, is a covenant of hunters organised by Valter, a man who ate a parasite that allows him to see the creatures he calls vermin, hidden within other people. Fact 108. Valter believes that vermin are the true source of the beast scourge and that hunters must crush them wherever they are found. He is methodical, serious, and possibly correct about some of this. Fact 109. The League uniform, the Hunter of Hunters set, emphasises order and discipline over the more individualistic styles of most hunters. The Covenant is about collective purpose. Fact 110. Hunters of Hunters are a special type of hunter whose purpose is to hunt other hunters who have lost themselves to the blood. They are the internal enforcement of the craft. Fact 111. Eileen the Crow is the primary example of a hunter of hunters in the game. She is old, experienced, and entirely practical. She does what needs to be done and does not dress it up. Fact 112. Her questline involves her hunting another hunter named Henrik, who happens to be the father of Gascoigne, another hunter the player encounters early in the game. Fact 113. Father Gascoigne is the first real boss of Bloodborne and one of the most emblematic. He is a hunter who lost himself during the hunt, transformed into a beast. Mid-battle. Fact 114. He has a family, a wife and 2 daughters. The music box his daughter gives, the player can momentarily calm him during the fight, restoring something like recognition before the transformation reasserts itself. Fact 115. His wife jumps from a roof when she learns what happened to him. The younger daughter, if left, eventually falls to her own fate. The older daughter appears in a later area and may be taken to safety. Fact 116. Gascoigne's story is not the exception, it is the rule. The game is full of hunters who did not make it, who held on too long, who convinced themselves one more night would be fine. Fact 117. The blood vials that function as healing items in the game are the same blood. That causes the scourge. The hunter is constantly dosing themselves with the thing that will eventually destroy them. Fact 118. This is not an accident of design. The tension between needing the blood to survive the hunt and the blood slowly changing you is the entire point of the hunter's existence. Fact 119. The insight stat in the game represents accumulated cosmic knowledge. The more you have, the more you perceive, the harder enemies hit you, the stranger the world becomes. Knowledge is a liability. Fact 120. At very high insight, the celestial larvae become visible in the cathedral ward area. They were always there. You could not see them before. Fact 121. The doll in the hunter's dream responds differently depending on your insight level. At a certain point, she begins to speak about loneliness more directly, as if she too sees more when you do. Fact 122. Hunters who die return to the hunter's dream, which is why you wake thereat, the start, and why death is not permanent. The dream is a holding space between hunts. Fact 123. The blood echoes that drop on death and must be retrieved represent the accumulated blood and experience of the hunter. Losing them permanently is losing a piece of your progress. Fact 124. The game treats blood echoes as genuinely precious in its fiction. They are not just a currency. They are described as the very essence of the hunt crystallized. Fact 125. The madman's knowledge items that grant insight are described as skulls, soaked in knowledge. Consuming them increases your perception. Someone had to acquire that knowledge first. Fact 126. The Great One's wisdom and the blood of Adeline are the higher versions of these items. The escalation in names reflects an escalation in the nature of what is being consumed. Fact 127. Hunter tools in the arcane tree are essentially spells. They draw on the power of the Great Ones or borrow their attention. The Executioner's gloves, for instance, summon souls drawn from Logarius's research. Fact 128. Master Willem, head of Byrgenwerth College, believed that eyes were the key to cosmic ascension. He is found in a rocking chair facing the lake, eyes removed, completely still. Fact 129. He apparently gave himself over to this belief entirely, extracting his own eyes, in pursuit of something on the other side. Whatever he saw, if anything, died with him. Fact 130. Byrgenwerth College predates the Healing Church and was the original institution that discovered the ruins and the old blood. The schism between Lawrence and Willem broke the institution apart. Fact 131. Willem's faction believed in eyes, cosmic elevation, the modification of the mind. Lawrence's faction believed in the blood, physical transformation, the body as the path. Fact 132. These two philosophies generated every faction in the game. The choir is Willem's heirs in method, if not in loyalty. The church is Lawrence's project. The hunters are the armed compromise. Fact 133. Carol runes, the runic system used for gameplay bonuses, are transcriptions of sounds made by Great Ones. They were developed by Carol, a student at Byrgenwerth. Fact 134. Carol was described as having terrible hearing for human sounds but perfect hearing for whatever the Great Ones emit. The runes she carved allowed those sounds to be stored and used. Fact 135. The air rune, which grants blood echoes when visceral attacking enemies, is described as representing the hunter's sympathy with their prey, the inheritance of blood and burden passing between them. Fact 136. The beast rune, which increases beast transformation progress along with beastly power, is one of the most provocative Carol runes. Using it is choosing to accelerate the very thing the church fights against. Fact 137. The old hunter bone item, obtained in the DLC, belonged to a hunter who had been in the business so long their very bones contain the memory of the hunt. Fact 138. The fishing hamlet hunters found in the DLC's final area are villagers who took up weapons against the choir members who attacked Kos. They became hunters from necessity and grief. Fact 139. The cramped casket item in the DLC raises questions about what the choir did to prisoners in the research hall. The caskets are small. The implication is not subtle. Fact 140. Brador, a secret enemy in the DLC, is a church assassin sent into the hunter's nightmare to prevent certain knowledge from escaping. He wears a beast's head as a hood and carries a whip. Fact 141. He was once a scholar who participated in the fishing hamlet raid. He wore the beast's skin of a friend or colleague who transformed, possibly as guilt, possibly as identity. Fact 142. He will hunt you persistently once you collect certain items. He is not hostile. Out of malice. He is executing orders he has internalized so completely that they have become him. Fact 143. His gear, the bloodletter, and his attire are among the strangest in the game. The bloodletter drives a spike through the hand to extract blood directly, a literal expression of the church's worst ideas. Fact 144. The choir bell that summons hunters for co-op play is described in the lore as an instrument that resonates across the nightmare. The multiplayer system is built into the fiction. Fact 145. Hunter helper summons in the game are called confederates. The sunken bell used to invade is called the sinister resonant bell. The names are loaded. Fact 146. Old hunters who could not be killed or who refused to die were sometimes consigned to the hunter's nightmare rather than simply kept alive in the waking world. Fact 147. This is implied to be what happened to Ludwig, whose scale of violence made him a liability even before his transformation became complete. Fact 148. The Gatling gun wielded by the hunter enemies in the game is an anachronism, a weapon too advanced for Yharnam's apparent Victorian era. The game does not explain this. Fact 149. One possible reading is that hunter technology developed along lines entirely disconnected from conventional industrial history, driven by arcane research rather than mechanical engineering. Fact 150. The saw cleaver, the game's starting weapon for the most aggressive play style, is described as being popular for its ability to tear through beast flesh. It is a practical tool made into an art. Chapter 4. The Great Ones and the Cosmos. Fact 151. The Great Ones are not gods in the conventional sense. They are not worshipped because they created the world or offer salvation. They are approached because contact with them changes the nature of consciousness. Fact 152. Murgo is a Great One, or the child of one, who is in a state of eternal crying. Within the nightmare, Murgo has never been seen. Only the wet nurse and the crying are known. Fact 153. The nightmare of Mensis is the area created around or through Murgo's existence. The scholars of Mensis attempted to reach Murgo through a ritual and were largely destroyed by it. Fact 154. The brain of Mensis, visible hanging in the nightmare, is the scholars themselves merged into a single entity through the ritual. They are still thinking, still reaching, with no coherent self remaining. Fact 155. Looking at the brain deals damage and applies frenzy, the game's representation of a mind being overwhelmed. This is not a coincidence. The brain is doing this deliberately. Fact 156. The moon presence has 3 known names used by different factions. The most common is simply the moon presence. Others call it by the rune that represents it. Pale blood. Fact 157. Pale blood is mentioned at the very start of the game. The player's character is described as searching for pale blood. This is not explained further until the very end of the game, if at all. Fact 158. The moon presence appears to have been manipulating events in Yharnam, possibly for a very long time. The hunt, the blood, the church, all of it may serve its purposes. Fact 159. Its purpose, as best as can be interpreted, is to produce a new Great One. It needs a surrogate, a child that will be something more than human. The hunter may be that candidate. Fact 160. Consuming 3 umbilical cords of Great Ones before fighting Gehrman produces an ending where you become an infant Great One looked after by the doll. This is neither clearly good nor bad. Fact 161. The doll's final lines in this ending are gentle. She watches over you. The question of whether an infant Great One experiences anything like human emotion is left open. Fact 162. Kin enemies as opposed to beast enemies represent the cosmic side of the game's horror. They are associated with eyes, celestial bodies, and fluid, non-biological forms. Fact 163. The celestial emissary, a boss in the cathedral ward, is a mass of small, celestial beings that merge into a larger one during the fight. It is one of the stranger boss presentations in the game. Fact 164. Amygdalae are the enormous spider-limbed entities perched on the sides of buildings in the cathedral ward. Most players cannot see them initially. High insight reveals them. Fact 165. The amygdalae are Great Ones, or extensions of Great Ones, that have been in Yharnam for some time. The citizens cannot see them, which is either a mercy or a deliberate suppression. Fact 166. One amygdala in the lecture building will grab the player and teleport them to the hunter's nightmare if you have sufficient insight. It is the literal gateway to the Dilk. Fact 167. The lecture building itself is a strange place, a university that exists partially within a nightmare. Students transformed into slime scholars fill the halls. Faculty are nowhere. Fact 168. Notes and documents in the lecture building suggest that at some point normal academic life occurred here. Then the experiments escalated and it became something else. Fact 169. The astral clock tower, the final section of the deal, is housed in what appears to be an enormous clock mechanism. Time within it may function differently. The patients never seem to age. Fact 170. Lady Maria's attire describes her as having aristocratic blood, connecting her to Cainhurst. She may have been a vile blood before she became a hunter, which would make her story even more complicated. Fact 171. The Lumenwood Garden, one of the Dill's areas, is where patients of the research hall were sent after being successfully elevated. It is a garden inside an enormous clock. The patients stand in the moonlight. Fact 172. The garden garb set describes the patients as having been given the thing. The choir promised elevation, but they are not happy. They are simply different. Whether that constitutes success is the question. Fact 173. Adeline in the research hall is one of the patients who is still lucid. She craves brain fluid, which the player can obtain from enemies and other patients, and consuming it gradually elevates her. Fact 174. After enough brain fluid, Adeline achieves something she experiences as fulfillment. She thanks you and gives you her own blood, which is the item that provides the highest insight gain in the game. Fact 175. Whether Adeline's transformation is liberation or further violation is left entirely to the player's interpretation. The game presents it without editorial comment. Fact 176. The Great Ones are described as having lost or given up their children. This grief is treated as a kind of fuel or motivation. Murgo's eternal crying is a great one who has never been comforted. Fact 177. The Cord of the Eye, found as a reward from the plain doll early in the game's story, is described as a gift from the Great Ones, given to hunters to ease the hunt. Whether it is actually a gift or a tool is unclear. Fact 178. Eyes on the inside is a phrase that recurs in the game's late areas. Michaelash asks for it. Characters who achieve higher consciousness are described as having gained it. It refers to internal perception, seeing the cosmos from within. Fact 179. The Kos parasite, a weapon from the Dilk, is described as the remains of the parasites that lived inside Kos, still containing some of her power. Using it attracts the sympathy of leftover Kos consciousness. Fact 180. The Milkweed rune, which transforms the player's appearance when using the Kos parasite into something resembling the Lumenwood patients, is described as a bewitching rune that draws out the parasite's full strength. Fact 181. The Moon Presence's arena, the top of the healing church, is drenched in blood-red moonlight and flowers. It is one of the most visually distinct moments in the game. Fact 182. The flowers are confirmed in item descriptions to be relevant to lunar influence and the Pthumerian rituals. Their presence in Gehrman's garden is not decorative. Fact 183. Gehrman tends the garden himself. He seems to find some peace in it. It is one of the few things in the dream that suggests genuine gentleness in him. Fact 184. The hunter's dream burns at the game's conclusion regardless of ending. Whatever form the ending takes, the dream does not persist in the same way. The night ends. Fact 185. The dog that is sometimes present in the hunter's dream is not commented on by any character. It simply exists there. Some players believe it represents something specific. The game does not say. Fact 186. The messengers who sell items in the game are small, pale, multi-armed beings that gather around the lanterns and the shop stalls. Their origin is never explained. Fact 187. The messenger bath in the hunter's dream where you can purchase items is one of those details that lands as deeply strange the more you think about it. Who set it up? When? Fact 188. The Insight Bath functions the same way, but sells items only available through Insight rather than Blood Echoes. The economy of the dream mirrors the two currencies of the hunt. Fact 189. Some messengers wear hats that can be given to them by the player. This is purely cosmetic. They seem pleased by it. It is perhaps the most purely gentle. Interaction in the game. Fact 190. The Great Ones are not all equivalent. Some are vast and incomprehensible. Like the moon presence, some like Ebrietus seem more present, more responsive to human contact. Some like Murgo have never been seen at all. Fact 191. The distinction between Great Ones and kin is maintained carefully in the game's taxonomies. Kin are beings that have been elevated or transformed toward the cosmic. Great Ones are something else from the start. Fact 192. The astral clock above the research hall is described as measuring something other than time. What it measures is not specified. The mechanism runs constantly. Fact 193. The fishing hamlet priest enemies in the deal drop the accursed brew. 1. Of the more explicit arcane tools in the game, described as the skull of a Kos fetus used as a vessel for her ocean. Fact 194. The imagery around Kos consistently invokes the sea, birth and grief. Her entire iconography is maternal and oceanic, which stands in marked contrast to the lunar, architectural imagery of the moon presence. Fact 195. The two Great Ones that most directly influence the player's story Kos through the DLC and the moon presence through the main ending are both implicitly female in their design and description. Fact 196. This may be deliberate. The game repeatedly links Great Ones to reproduction, children lost or sought, and the anguish of that loss. The gender coding is consistent with that theme. Fact 197. Arcane damage in the game visually tends toward blue, silver and cosmic effects. Bolt damage, also arcane adjacent in theme, tends toward gold and lightning. The colour language is consistent. Fact 198. The bolt paper and fire paper items are temporary weapon upgrades that apply elemental damage by saturating a weapon with a specific type of alchemical compound. The church developed both. Fact 199. Pungent blood cocktails can distract beasts by exploiting their obsession with blood. Even in full transformation, the beast's fixation on blood remains. The scourge does not extinguish appetite, it amplifies it. Fact 200. The One Reborn, a boss in Yharnam, is a massive pile of corpses animated into a single entity. It is one of the more literally grotesque Great One adjacent entities in the game. Chapter 5. Yharnam and the Nightmare's Edge. Fact 201. Yharnam is the unseen village, a district of Yharnam that the Mensis scholars sealed off to conduct their rituals without interference. By the time you reach it, it is a place of profound dread. Fact 202. The village was sealed by a bell that prevents the dead from dying. Enemies in Yharnam will stand back up after being killed unless you ring a specific bell inside. Fact 203. This mechanic is the game communicating the nightmare logic that the Mensis scholars have imposed on the area. The bell is not just a plot device, it changes how you play. Fact 204. The Mensis ritual involved bringing the nightmare into the waking world, or bringing something from the nightmare through into Yharnam. What exactly came through is left ambiguous. Fact 205. Murgo's attendant, the wet nurse, is the figure that guards the Great One. Infant, she appears in the nightmare's deepest area and is the final boss before the game's actual ending sequence. Fact 206. The wet nurse's mask, worn by certain church figures, is modelled after her. The iconography of the wet nurse existed before the scholars found her, suggesting prior knowledge or prophecy. Fact 207. Yharnam's architecture is full of statues and carvings that predate the mensis. Scholars. The village had a history before it became a nightmare staging ground. Fact 208. The shadows of Yharnam, a trio of boss enemies, appear to be servants or functionaries of the Pthumerian queen. They guard a location of significance and use both blade and snake-related magic. Fact 209. The snakes associated with the shadows, and with certain Pthumerian areas, recur throughout the game's deep lore in ways that suggest an additional faction or belief system not fully explored. Fact 210. The Nightmare Frontier is a separate nightmare realm accessible through a later area of the game. It is cold, full of poison, and populated by amygdalaean kin enemies. Fact 211. Patches the Spider is found in the Nightmare Frontier. He is a familiar from software character transplanted into this world, which the game acknowledges with light self-awareness. Fact 212. In Bloodborne, Patches has transformed from his usual rogue archetype into something that appears to have spider legs, but may simply be a transformation stage. He is still himself, greedy, practical, oddly likeable. Fact 213. The Nightmare Frontier boss, Amygdala, is one of the most visually dramatic in the game. It is a full amygdala encountered in the open, the entity you have been glimpsing on buildings, finally made tangible. Fact 214. Amygdala tears off its own arms during the fight and uses them as clubs. This detail is one of those moments where the game's designers seem to be asking you to think about what you are fighting. Fact 215. The nightmare realms in the game are not simply bad places. They have their own internal logic, their own populations, their own architecture. They are worlds, just wrong ones. Fact 216. The hunter's nightmare of the Dilk has a river of blood running through it. The amount of blood is staggering. The source is implied to be the accumulated violence of all the hunters trapped there. Fact 217. Simon the Harrowed mentions that the river has always been there, that it was running when he arrived. This suggests the nightmare accumulates rather than resets. Fact 218. The Hunter's workshop in the Delcy's nightmare is a decrepit version of the waking hunter's workshop. It contains old weapons and old memories. Gehrman's presence can be felt even here. Fact 219. The underground cell in the Delki is where the church imprisoned people in the nightmare. Why they would imprison people in a nightmare rather than simply kill them is a question the game leaves open. Fact 220. Yamamura the Wanderer is a hunter from the east who came to Yharnam and ended up imprisoned in the underground cell, his mind broken. He can be summoned as a friendly phantom if freed. Fact 221. His attire describes him as a hunter of beasts and men, suggesting he was a kind of hunter of hunters from another culture. What he saw or experienced to break his mind is not told. Fact 222. The Rakuyo, a weapon associated with Yamamura, is a paired sword and dagger with an elaborate mechanical transformation. It is one of the most technically interesting weapons in the DLC. Fact 223. The concept of hunters from other lands, with different traditions and different relationships to the blood and the hunt, is suggested but never fully developed in the base game. The Dilk expands this slightly. Fact 224. The east in the game's geography is entirely undefined. Yamamura comes from there. That is essentially all that is said. The world outside Yharnam exists, but is not mapped. Fact 225. Similarly, the origin of the player character is never explained. You come from Outside Yharnam seeking blood ministration. Your past, your illness, your name, none of it matters. You become a hunter, and that is enough. Fact 226. The player character's silence is a deliberate choice. There are no voiced lines, no cutscene reactions, no expressions. You are a perspective through which the world is witnessed. Fact 227. This is different from the silent protagonists of other From Software games. In Bloodborne, the silence feels particularly stark because every other character speaks at length about their inner world. Fact 228. The Cainhurst summons item, which allows access to the castle through a coach driven by an invisible force, is one of the game's more atmospheric optional discoveries. Fact 229. Cainhurst Castle is frozen in time, covered in snow that seems permanent. The vile bloods inside are not dead, but not quite fully living either. The castle is a pocket of suspended existence. Fact 230. The architecture of Cainhurst is baroque and decadent compared to Yharnam's Gothic functionality. The vile bloods come from a different cultural tradition, even in terms of their built environment. Fact 231. The Logarius fight atop Cainhurst is one of the game's most demanding. He was an executioner sent to seal the castle who became so consumed by his task that he never left. Fact 232. He seals Annalise with his own body, essentially using himself as a lock. When you defeat him, you can access the crown he wears, which opens the hidden room where she is sitting. Fact 233. Logarius's wheel, his boss weapon, is described as a symbol of the executioner's faith. The wheel is spun to generate its power, and the description suggests the spinning is prayer. Fact 234. The Executioner Covenant is not available for joining in the final game. It was cut, which means Alfred is the only representative of that faction you properly interact with. Fact 235. Alfred's weapons, the Kerchimer and the threaded cane, are both available to the player regardless of affiliation. He does not have unique gear, which makes him feel like a reflection of the player's own potential path. Fact 236. The Kerchimer, a silver-headed church hammer mounted on a blade, is described as favoured by church hunters who prefer to strike in faith. It is both beautiful and absurd as a weapon design. Fact 237. The threaded cane is the most elegant starting weapon, a cane that transforms into a whip associated with aristocratic hunters who value form. Alfred using. It is an interesting contradiction given his blunt personality. Fact 238. Weapon flavor text in Bloodborne is among the most carefully written in the game. Each description does at least two things: tells you something mechanical and tells you something about the world. Fact 239. The Shikage, a vile blood weapon, converts health to temporary damage when in its transformed state. The mechanic directly represents the cost of vile blood. Power, you consume yourself to become stronger. Fact 240. The Blade of Mercy, associated with the Hunter of Hunters, is fast and light, and designed for killing quickly rather than fighting at length. It reflects Eileen's philosophy of swift, clean resolution. Fact 241. Eileen's questline can go wrong if the player does not act in a specific way. She can be killed by the hunter she is hunting, leaving her wounded outside the Grand Cathedral. You can find her dying there. Fact 242. If she dies, her quest items can be obtained, but her final arc is closed. This is the game's standard approach. No character is protected from consequence by their importance to the story. Fact 243. The NPCs in Bloodborne die at a higher rate than in any other From Software game. Most questlines end in death if completed. This is not random cruelty, it is the game's worldview expressed through design. Fact 244. The The only NPC who survives with anything like a good outcome is possibly the plain doll who was never fully alive in the human sense, and possibly the older Gascoigne daughter if escorted successfully. Fact 245. The game offers small, specific victories within an overwhelming tragedy. Finding the Gascoigne daughter a safe house, helping Eileen finish her hunt, giving Jura a reason to put down his gun. Fact 246. These moments are the game's definition of hope. Not transformation, not salvation, not progress toward a better world. Just, this one thing was handled with care. That counts for something. Fact 247. The Hunter's Dream music, composed by Yuka Kitamura and others, is deliberately gentle in contrast to the game's ambient horror. It is the one place in the game that sounds like a lullaby. Fact 248. The boss music varies dramatically. Ludwig's second phase, when memory partially returns, shifts into a melancholic, soaring motif that is entirely unlike the earlier chaos of his animal form. Fact 249. The music of the Orphan of Kos fight is relentless, operatic, and mournful simultaneously. It is one of the most commented on pieces of game music from that era. Fact 250. Bloodborne sound design generally uses water and wet sounds for cosmic, and Great One-related horror, fire and crackling for beast-related horror. The acoustic language of the two horrors is distinct. Chapter 6. The Long Night and What It Means. Fact 251. The hunt takes place over a single night. The entire game, from the opening, blood transfusion to the final boss, represents one long night in Yharnam. Fact 252. The progression of the sky over the course of the game is carefully tracked. Early areas have a dusky red sky. Later areas have a deeper, more cosmic darkness. The Mensis nightmare has the blood moon fully revealed. Fact 253. This single night structure means that everything the player does, every boss killed, every secret found, happens within approximately 12 hours of in-world time. The pace of catastrophe is striking. Fact 254. Yharnam has clearly had bad nights before. The existence of the Hunters, Nightmare, the old burned district of Old Yharnam, and the sealed sections of the city all point to previous crises. Fact 255. This night is different because of the alignment of cosmic forces. The moons, the Great Ones, the rituals, they have all converged. Whatever was always building has finally arrived at a breaking point. Fact 256. The player's arrival is not coincidental in a narrative sense. You came seeking blood. You became a hunter. Your progress through the city and the nightmares changes the outcome of the night. Fact 257. Whether that change is good or bad depends on what you do. All three endings are defensible. All three endings are also tragic in different ways. Fact 258. The sunrise ending, achieved by refusing Gehrman's offer and having him kill you, is technically the ending where you wake up outside the dream. Whether that means you truly escaped is debated. Fact 259. The waking world at the end of the sunrise ending is implied to be continuing. The hunt in the ordinary sense. The blood scourge has not been resolved. Yharnam is still Yharnam. Fact 260. The Gehrman ending, where you defeat him and take his place in the dream, means you become the next warden, the next prisoner of the moon presence, presiding over Hunters for whatever comes next. Fact 261. This is, in some readings, an act of mercy toward Gehrman. He has been there long enough. You take his burden, whether that is heroism or tragedy or both is up to you. Fact 262. The Great One ending, where you consume 3 umbilical cords and fight the moon presence, is the only ending that actually disrupts the cycle at the level it needs to be disrupted. Fact 263. But the disruption produces not a free world but a new state, an infant great, one watched over by the doll. The cycle may simply be beginning again in a different form. Fact 264. From software's endings in general resist resolution. They end in transition, not conclusion. Bloodborne follows this pattern, but with more emotional weight on the specific figures involved. Fact 265. The doll weeping in the Great One ending is one of the most discussed moments. She says she is crying tears of joy. Whether that is true, whether she is capable of knowing, is itself a question. Fact 266. Yharnam citizens who survive the night do so by staying inside, by following the instructions of whoever is still broadcasting them, by not engaging. Survival through passivity. Fact 267. The citizens you can interact with early in the game, the woman who tells you to go away, the man who calls for his wife, the children hiding in a wardrobe, are all traces of ordinary life trying to persist. Fact 268. The wardrobe children are particularly haunting. They ask you to find their mother. Their mother is dead by the time you would naturally encounter her. You can find a red brooch that belonged to her and bring it back. Fact 269. There is no good outcome for those children. The brooch confirms what happened. The game does not give you a fix. It gives you the small, painful acknowledgement that you looked for her. Fact 270. The tiny music box, a separate item from the brooch, plays a tune that can calm Gascoigne temporarily during the fight. The same music box belongs to his daughter. The family is connected through objects even as it falls apart. Fact 271. Item connections between characters are one of Bloodborne's primary storytelling tools. You carry things that belong to people you never met, and sometimes you can return them to someone who knew them. Fact 272. The callous letter found in Cainhurst is addressed to a healing church official who never arrived to read it. The letter hints at the political intrigue between Cainhurst and the church that preceded the game's events by decades. Fact 273. Letters and notes as environmental storytelling appear throughout the game. The reading they require is minimal, but the reward in terms of world building is consistent. Fact 274. The old hunter's bone, mentioned earlier, is found near a dried pool of blood, as if the hunter who owned it simply stopped in the middle of the hunt and never moved. Again, fact 275. Details like this are what give Bloodborne's world its texture. The game does not explain every corpse, every bloodstain, every abandoned item. It just places them and trusts you to feel the weight. Fact 276. Byrgenwerth College appears in the game as a location, not just a referenced institution. You can walk its halls, read its remaining texts, and fight Rom in the lake behind it. Fact 277. The school is mostly empty by the time you arrive. A few scholar enemies remain, maddened. Master Willem is in the courtyard. The place has clearly been abandoned for some time. Fact 278. The library within Byrgenwerth contains books and notes that reward careful reading. The school had a whole academic culture that the Beast Scourge and the Choir's Rise made irrelevant. Fact 279. Willem's rune, which he has found sitting beside, is the Eye rune. It grants additional insight. He spent his life pursuing what that rune represents, and this is where that pursuit ended. Fact 280. The game does not treat Willem as a failure exactly. He achieved what he sought, or something close to it. The tragedy is that what he achieved did not help anyone. Fact 281. Knowledge that cannot be communicated, that transforms rather than informs, that costs everything to acquire, runs through the game as a recurring concern. Wisdom that destroys the wise. Fact 282. Mikolash is the most explicit version of this. He sought knowledge, obsessively, entered the nightmare voluntarily, and became the gibbering host who runs from you through a maze quoting his own texts. Fact 283. His words are still coherent if you pass them. He is not random. He is just no. Longer bounded by the social contracts that make knowledge useful to others. Fact 284. The mensis cage, worn by some Yahargal enemies, is a metal cage placed over the head that the choir used to attempt contact with Great Ones. The theory was that it would attract their attention. Fact 285. The theory may have worked. The people wearing the cages are not dead. They are altered. Whether the alteration was worth it is the same question the game asks about every transformation. Fact 286. The choir crown worn by Mikolash similarly suggests an attempt to receive something from above, to make the head a vessel for something larger. It is fashion as aspiration. Fact 287. Bloodborne's visual design consistently uses vertical orientation for cosmic aspiration. Towers, spires, cranes, the clock tower, the cathedral's height, all of it reaches upward in a world where what is up is not heaven. Fact 288. The horizontal expanse is where the beasts are, the ground level, the sewers, the chalice dungeons going further and further down. The vertical is the cosmic, the horizontal is the animal. Fact 289. Hunters navigate between these levels constantly. They go down into the beast world and up toward the cosmic world, and they are changed by both. Fact 290. The hunter's dream floats above the city in an implied sense. It is accessed through sleep and death. It is neither up nor down in the world but outside it. Fact 291. The flowers and garden of the dream sit at the same level as its workshops and tools. Cultivation and violence coexist there the way they coexist in Yharnam. Fact 292. The graves in the hunter's dream increase over time as NPCs die. Each grave is marked. Yharnam presumably added them all. He has been marking graves for a very long time. Fact 293. You can interact with the graves. Some have notes or messages. The game uses even this quiet mechanic to communicate that the hunt always costs more than it solves. Fact 294. The cleric beasts that appear throughout the game are hunters or church figures who have transformed. The cleric in cleric beast refers to their origin in church. Ministry. Fact 295. The first boss of the game, the cleric beast, is encountered on a bridge above the city. Its scale is enormous relative to the street below. The transformation is not subtle. Fact 296. The cleric beast has no associated character. It is not a named figure with a questline. It is simply what happens, the end state of the Blood's promise taken to completion. Fact 297. Father Gascoigne, by contrast, is a named boss with a full family context and a questline that precedes the fight. This contrast is deliberate. The named tragedy hits harder than the anonymous horror. Fact 298. The game uses both modes, named and unnamed, to build its sense of the beast scourge as both individual catastrophe and systemic condition. Fact 299. Hemwick Charnel Lane is populated by grave women who have become obsessed with blood, collecting it from corpses, gathering bone meal. They are not beasts. They are simply broken by proximity to the scourge. Fact 300. The Witch of Hemwick, a boss in that area, is a surprisingly unassuming enemy. She is small, hunched, invisible until she summons madmen. Her power comes from hiding, from misdirection, not from force. Chapter 7. The Final Pieces. Fact 301. The three endings of Bloodborne are often discussed in terms of which is best, but the game consistently resists that framing. Each is a different accommodation to an impossible situation. Fact 302. Becoming a great one does not mean winning. It means becoming something that operates on a different scale, whether that scale includes anything like happiness is unknowable. Fact 303. Taking Gehrman's place does not mean continuing his tragedy identically. You are a different person with different knowledge, but the structure is the same. The dream will have a new warden. Fact 304. Waking outside the dream, the sunrise ending, means returning to a Yharnam that is still a Yharnam. The problem remains. You have just stepped out of the position of being the one who deals with it. Fact 305. In that sense, the sunrise ending is the most human. It chooses life in an imperfect world over cosmic transformation or self-sacrifice. It is not cowardice. It is choosing finitude. Fact 306. The game respects all three choices. This is unusual. Most games build their structures to nudge you toward the true ending. Bloodborne's three endings feel equally weighted. Fact 307. The abandoned old workshop hidden within the cathedral ward is a decrepit version of the Hunter's Dream workshop. It existed in the waking world before the dream was established. Fact 308. Inside it is an empty doll, the original physical form that the doll in the dream was based on. Finding it suggests that the dream's workshop is a copy of something real. Fact 309. This raises questions about which came first, the waking workshop where Gehrman worked, or the dream that preserves it. The answer points to the dream as secondary, constructed, a copy of a life. Fact 310. Gehrman built the dream from memory or with the moon presence's help. Either way, he is living in a reproduction of the place where he was happiest, unable to leave it. Fact 311. The doll, modelled after Maria, in a workshop modelled after the real workshop, surrounded by graves of hunters he could not save. The dream is a perfect description of a certain kind of grief. Fact 312. Maria herself is in the nightmare, not the dream. She went somewhere else when she sealed herself in the tower. The copy of her remains in Gehrman's world while the original is lost in the nightmare. Fact 313. The guidance rune, which brings Ludwig peace, says that those who wish to transcend the hunt can do so by following the wisdom of the hunters. It is essentially the game's equivalent of professional ethics. Fact 314. The original guidance suggests that being a good hunter means maintaining your humanity within the violence, not losing yourself to the blood or the knowledge or the grief. Fact 315. This is obviously very hard. The game shows you person after person for whom it proved impossible. Gascoigne, Ludwig, Brador, the Mensis scholars, the research hall patients. Fact 36. The ones who come closest are the ones who allow themselves to grieve. Eileen, who hunts but mourns. Simon, who was blinded but still looks. Maria, who sealed herself rather than continue doing harm. Fact 317. The doll, who was made to be a copy and has found something real within. That copied existence in some ways achieves what everyone in the game is trying to achieve. She is present, she feels, she stays. Fact 318. Whether she is real in the way humans are real is a question the game leaves completely open. Whether it matters is the question the game seems more interested in. Fact 319. The plain doll's questline, such as it is entirely one-sided. She speaks. You listen. She thanks you for being present. She asks nothing in return. This is its own kind of comment. Fact 320. The milkweed ending of the doll, which is not a real ending but a fan-discussed interpretation of the Great One ending, imagines her as a new kind of guardian, tending something new. The game supports this reading without confirming it. Fact 321. The scourge of beasts is ultimately a disease of longing. Every person who transforms was reaching for something, healing, power, knowledge, connection, the Blood promises it, and the promise consumes them. Fact 322. The great ones are also longing for children, for contact, for something that can perceive them. The game's tragedy operates at multiple scales, but it is the same tragedy at each one. Fact 323. The insight currency framing, knowledge as a resource that can run out or be replenished, that affects how you experience the world, is one of the game's most elegant mechanical metaphors. Fact 324. Bloodborne does not explain its mechanics in terms of the fiction as thoroughly as some games do, but the insight system is one where the mechanical feeling precisely matches the thematic meaning. Fact 325. More insight means the world is harder and stranger. Less insight means it is simpler and more manageable. The game is asking whether you want to know. Fact 326. Most players increase their insight as much as possible. This is the nature of playing a game where knowing more is usually an advantage. The game accepts this and makes the world harder accordingly. Fact 37. The item Madman's Knowledge, dropped by the wandering skulls in certain areas, is one of the most plentiful sources of insight. There are many madmen. Knowledge drove them all there. Fact 328. The hunter's nightmare as a space accumulates the failures and the crimes of the craft. It is where the bill comes due. You spend most of the dilk walking through what the hunt actually cost. Fact 329. The fishing hamlet is the deepest point of the nightmare and the farthest from anything resembling redemption. What happened there was the worst thing the church did, and the nightmare preserves it completely. Fact 330. The Orphan of Kos is born new in every encounter. He is not a recorded memory. He is a recurring grief. The nightmare makes Kos's loss continuous rather than historical. Fact 331. Defeating him releases something. His death animation, unique among bosses, involves him looking upward and something like relief passing over his face. Before he falls, the mother receives the child back. Fact 332. This moment is the Delci's equivalent of the guidance rune. Not transcendence, not victory exactly, just the suffering stops. That has to be enough. Fact 333. Lawrence the First Vicar's skull, when used in the ritual, produces a brief vision. The vision is not explained. The player perceives something, and then it is over. Knowledge without context. Fact 334. This is Bloodborne's consistent epistemology. You can see more and more, but you will never have the full picture. The world is larger than any frame you can build. Around it. Fact 335. The game's final area before the Gehrman fight is the garden. You walk through flowers and moonlight to reach the wheelchair. The garden was always the centre. The violence was always in service of something that wanted to be still. Fact 336. Gehrman's dialogue before the fight is gentle and weary. He is not an enemy. Exactly. He is a very tired person offering you the best exit he knows how to give. Fact 337. The fight itself is technically excellent and thematically loaded. He uses the burial blade, the weapon that started everything, and he is still very good with it. Mastery persisting past the point where it should matter. Fact 338. The Moon Presence fight, if triggered, is enormous and strange and over quickly by the standards of final bosses. It is appropriately alien. You are fighting something that does not experience the fight the way you do. Fact 339. Its death, the way it collapses, is not triumphant. It is just done. The game does not celebrate it. The ending sequence begins immediately. Fact 340. The plain doll picking up the infant, if you reach that ending, and cradling it, and the camera pulling back to show the dream still existing, flowers still growing, is the final image of the main game. Fact 341. It is quiet, after everything, after all the blood and transformation and cosmic. Horror, the last image, is someone caring for something small and new. Fact 342. Whether that is hope or the beginning of the next cycle is the question the game ends on. From software does not answer it, you carry it with you. Fact 343. The Delsey's final image, the ocean, the silence after the orphan is gone, the village empty, is equally unresolved. The nightmare does not end, the choir's crime does not unhappen. But the specific anguish that filled the air is quieter now. Fact 344. Bloodborne was released in 2015 and remains one of the most discussed games in terms of its lore, its design, and its emotional register. The conversation has not slowed. Fact 345. Hidetaka Miyazaki directed the game and has discussed aspects of its themes in interviews, but has consistently declined to provide definitive interpretations. The ambiguity is intentional and protected. Fact 346. The game sold approximately 2 million copies in its first few months and has maintained a dedicated community for over a decade. The analysis continues to produce new observations. Fact 347. Discoveries continue to be made. Hidden messages, obscure item, connections, architectural details that recontextualize known lore. The game was built with more depth than it announced. Fact 348. The Bloodborne community has produced an enormous body of secondary analysis, fan art, music, and writing that treats the game as a primary text worth sustained engagement. Fact 349. Part of the reason the lore sustains so much analysis is precisely its fragmentation. A complete story can be absorbed and finished. A fragmentary one can always yield more. Fact 350. The game's approach to horror is not primarily about violence or surprise. It is about the feeling that the world is larger and stranger than the frame you are using to navigate it. That feeling does not diminish with familiarity. Fact 351. The clocks in the game, particularly in the DLC, are a recurring visual motif. That has not been fully decoded. Clocks in a world where time functions strangely, in nightmares and dreams, point to an unresolved layer. Fact 352. The astral clock measures something unnamed. The clock tower houses patience, time in the nightmare loops for the Orphan of Kos. Something about time in Bloodborne is not what it appears. Fact 353. This is one of the areas where further analysis continues to work. Whether there is a coherent theory of time in the game, or whether the clocks are simply aesthetic, is genuinely unclear. Fact 354. The beasthood mechanic, which allows hunters to access beast power at the primary cost of defense, is the game's mechanical expression of the central tension. You can use the scourge. Using it costs you. Fact 355. Almost no one uses beasthood builds seriously. The trade-off is too steep for most playstyles. But that is also the point. The path of using the beast is available, it just demands more than most are willing to pay. Fact 356. The cleric beasts and the beast patients in the game's world made that payment, either by choice or by circumstance. The beasthood meter is just the game, making you live it briefly. Fact 357. The Chalice dungeons, excluded from the main focus of this video, contain their own layered history. Root chalices generated procedurally still reference Pthumerian architecture and suggest a civilizational depth that the main game only hints at. Fact 358. The Depth 5 Cursed Dungeons are among the most brutal experiences the game offers, mechanically. In terms of lore, they are the deepest contact with the Pthumerian civilization available. Fact 359. The bloodletting beast found in Deep Chalice dungeons is the most extreme example of a failed Pthumerian experiment. Its scale and the worms that emerge from it suggest experiments with beasts at a civilizational level. Fact 360. The undead giant bosses in the dungeons are shambling, restrained figures, chained beasts kept as weapons or guardians by the Pthumerians. They are ancient. And wrong. Fact 361. The Defiled Chalice dungeon is specifically famous among players for cutting the player's maximum health in half. It is an endurance test that the game presents, without apology. Fact 362. The watchdog of the Old Lords in the Chalice dungeons is a massive flaming beast that moves with surprising speed and deals fire damage. It is associated with the old Pthumerian gods, which is another layer of the game's religious history. Fact 363. The Lauran civilization, another ancient culture referenced in the dungeons, was destroyed by a beast scourge. The Pthumerians, Lauran and Yharnam form a pattern. This keeps happening. The blood always comes with a cost. Fact 364. The pattern suggests that what Yharnam is experiencing is not unique, not a historical anomaly, but a recurring event. Civilizations reach for the cosmic, find the old, blood, and eventually burn. Fact 365. This reading makes the game's setting feel less like a singular tragedy and more like a loop. The hunt is always beginning somewhere. The scourge is already happening. Fact 366. The player's intervention, whatever ending you choose, is a local disruption in a much larger pattern. This is not hopeless exactly, but it is honest. Fact 367. The Bloodborne universe, as best as it can be reconstructed from all available sources, is one where the cosmos contains entities that human civilization cannot safely engage with, and has been reaching toward them anyway, over and over, since before. Recorded history. Fact 368. The hunters are the people tasked with managing the consequences of that reaching. They are, as much as anything, a symptom of the same problem they are trying to solve. Fact 369. The blood that makes them powerful hunters is the blood that will eventually destroy them. The knowledge that lets them navigate the nightmares is the knowledge that will fracture their minds. The craft is its own scourge. Fact 370. And yet the game is full of hunters who did their jobs with something like Grace, Eileen, Maria before the Hamlet, Ludwig before the nightmare broke him, Simon, still going, still asking questions. Fact 371. What the game seems to suggest, if it suggests anything, is that how you hold your impossible position matters, not because it changes the outcome, but because it defines who you are while you hold it. Fact 372. The night is long. The blood is everywhere. The great ones are watching, or they are not. And there is still a hunter in the fog, still moving forward, still choosing what kind of person to be while the world burns around them. Chapter 8. The Chalice Dungeons and the Pthumerian Civilization. Fact 373. The Chalice Dungeons are the oldest places in the game's world that a player can physically enter. They predate Yharnam, predate the Healing Church, predate Lawrence and Byrgenwerth and the hunt itself. They are the substrate beneath everything. Fact 374. Chalices are ritual vessels used to open access to specific dungeon configurations. The materials required to make them, ritual blood, tomb mold, arcane haze, pungent blood cocktail, are themselves lore objects that describe a whole economy of dungeon preparation. Fact 375. The ritual blood used in chalice creation is described as blood of the Pthumerian rituals, thickened with age. The fact that it is still viable centuries later says something about what kind of blood it is. Fact 376. There are fixed chalice dungeons, whose layouts are predetermined, and root chalice dungeons, which are procedurally generated. The fixed dungeons tell specific stories. The root dungeons generate lore-consistent environments from a shared vocabulary of Pthumerian architecture. Fact 377. The shared vocabulary is important. The root dungeons feel authentic because they are built from the same components as the fixed ones. The randomness is cosmetic. The underlying civilization is always the same. Fact 378. Fetid, rotted and cursed are modifiers that can be applied to root chalice dungeons. Each makes the dungeon more dangerous in specific ways. Fetid produces stronger enemies. Rotted adds environmental hazards. Cursed halves the player's health. They can be stacked. Fact 379. The lore reason for these modifiers is never explicitly given, but the implication is that different ritual preparations produce different conditions in the actual Pthumerian dungeons. Some were harder to enter than others. Some required the entrant to be weakened as part of the ritual contract. Fact 380. The Great Pthumeru Ihil Root Chalice, the deepest tier available, produces dungeons that feel genuinely different from the upper levels. The enemies are larger, the traps more elaborate, the bosses more extreme. The Pthumerians went very deep. Fact 381. Ihil is described in lore as a Pthumerian holy land, the innermost sanctum of their civilization. Getting there through the chalice system is a journey that mirrors whatever the Pthumerians themselves undertook to establish it. Fact 382. The Pthumerian elders, found as bosses in deep chalice dungeons, are old men in ceremonial robes who fight primarily through arcane magic. They are physically frail and cosmically dangerous. The image of scholarship weaponized against death is one the game returns to repeatedly. Fact 383. The Queen Yharnam boss in the Pthumeru Ihil Chalice is one of the most visually striking in the game. She is heavily pregnant, clothed in white, and fights using blood magic of a kind not seen elsewhere. Her movements suggest ritual as much as combat. Fact 384. The blood she uses is described as blood of the old labyrinth, implying she has access to a purer or older form of the old blood than anything the healing church ever processed. She is closer to the source. Fact 385. What the source is exactly, whether it is the Great Ones themselves, a geological phenomenon, something that was always in the earth, is never resolved. The chalice dungeons get closer to the question without answering it. Fact 386. The Pthumerian civilization appears to have been matrilineal, or at least matriarchally religious. The queen is the central figure. The elders serve her, or her memory. The rituals all converge on childbirth and lineage. Fact 387. The name Yharnam is shared between the city and the Pthumerian queen. Whether the city was named after her, or whether she was named after the place, or whether the connection runs in a different direction entirely, is one of the game's open. Questions. Fact 388. One reading is that the city of Yharnam was built over the site of the Queen's dwelling, that the healing church and the city itself sit atop a place that was already sacred to the Pthumerians, and that this proximity is part of why the blood was so accessible. Fact 389. The Pthumerian descendant, a boss in certain chalice dungeons, is a figure in tight wrappings that moves with inhuman speed, dual-wielding bladed weapons. It fights nothing like the robed elders. The Pthumerian civilization had warriors as well as scholars. Fact 390. The descendant's speed and style suggest that the physical training of Pthumerian warriors was as developed as their arcane knowledge. They were not merely a priestly caste, they had an armed tradition. Fact 391. The Chalice of Iz connects to a different strain of the dungeon system, one associated more closely with the Great Ones than with the Pthumerians specifically. The Iz dungeons feel cosmically alien in a way the Pthumeru ones do not. Fact 392. Ebrietas is found at the bottom of the Iz Chalice system in a fixed dungeon. Her presence there suggests that the Iz labyrinth was her original home or prison before the choir relocated her to the cathedral. She has been found more than once. Fact 393. The Iz enemies include celestial children, small pale creatures that move in groups and deal arcane damage. They are not kin exactly, but they are clearly not beast adjacent. They belong to a different horror register. Fact 394. The Garden of Eyes, a variant enemy found in the Iz dungeons, is a humanoid creature with eyes across its body. It drops insight when killed. The implication is that it has accumulated perception beyond the human capacity to hold, and proximity to it transfers some of that perception. Fact 395. The concept that perception is transmissible, that you can absorb knowledge or insight from proximity to those who have it, runs through the Chalice system in mechanical form. Killing eyes gives insight. It is acquisition through violence, the game's usual method. Fact 396. The Loran dungeons are a distinct strain, associated with the destroyed Loran civilization. They are darker, more fire and beast-oriented, less ceremonial than the Pthumeru dungeons. Loran was a different culture with a different relationship to the Old Blood. Fact 397. Loran is described as a tragic land that was devoured by the scourge before Yharnam's history even began. The dungeons are its remains, its underground monuments preserved even as the surface civilization was consumed. Fact 398. The Loran Dark Beast, one of the most dramatic bosses in the Chalice system, is an enormous beast wreathed in lightning. It moves like a storm given form. The lightning suggests that Loran developed an arcane tradition parallel to Yharnam's but oriented differently. Fact 399. Bolt damage as a category in the game is associated with the Loran strain as much as with the Church. The Church developed it from research into Loran remains. The technology travelled through the dungeons before it reached the surface. Fact 400. The Chalice dungeon bosses do not have quest lines or named backstories in the way surface bosses do. They are ancient and context-less in a way that makes them feel like encounters with deep time rather than with specific people. Fact 401. This is appropriate. The Chalice system is an archaeological encounter. You are not fighting a person in their moment of crisis. You are fighting what a civilization left behind after its moment of crisis had already passed. Fact 402. The Merciless Watcher bosses found in early Chalice dungeons are armoured Pthumerian guardians who fight with primitive weapons and can call allies. They are the lowest caste of dungeon guardian, and they are still more dangerous than most surface enemies. Fact 403. The layering of the dungeon difficulty from Merciless Watchers to Pthumerian Elders to Queen Yharnam traces a social hierarchy as well as a combat one. The deeper you go, the closer you are to whoever was actually in charge. Fact 404. Sinister bell-ringing women, enemies unique to the dungeon system, summon additional enemies using a ringing bell that echoes the same resonant bell mechanic used in multiplayer. The bell is a technology that works across layers of reality. Fact 405. The bell as a motif in the game is consistent. Bells call hunters. Bells summon enemies. Bells lock the dead in Yahargul. Bells open access to the fishing hamlet. Bell-related technology is the most reliable tool for crossing boundaries between states. Fact 406. The Watchers in the Chalice dungeons sometimes drop Pthumerian runes inscribed on tombstones. These are not collectible Carol runes. They are older. They suggest a runic tradition predating Carol's work by an enormous margin. Fact 407. Whether Carol knew about Pthumerian runic work when she developed her own system is not stated. The possibility that she was building on something older, that her inscriptions were translations of a prior tradition, is never closed off. Fact 408. The tomb prospectors referenced in NPC dialogue are people who enter the Chalice dungeons professionally, seeking materials and relics. They are not hunters in the traditional sense. They are archaeologists armed against what they find. Fact 409. The fact that tomb prospecting is an established profession implies that the Chalice dungeons were known about and systematically explored before the Healing Church's formal. History. There was an economy built around the dungeons before the Church rationalised it. Fact 410. The Chalice of Communion, referenced in item lore, was used by the choir to attempt contact with the Great Ones through the dungeon system. The dungeons are not just physical spaces, they are also communication infrastructure. Fact 411. The idea that the labyrinth functions as a kind of telephone network for the cosmic, that its geometry and its materials are specifically configured to transmit to and from the Great Ones, is one of the more unsettling implications of the Chalice system. Fact 411. Everything the Healing Church did above ground was a simplified, surface-level version of something the Pthumerians had already built below ground, with much more precision and at much greater cost. Fact 413. This makes the Church's hubris clearer. They were not pioneering. They were imitating imperfectly an older civilization's techniques, without the generations of refinement that made those techniques survivable. Fact 414. The bloodletting beast, found in deep Lauren dungeons, is perhaps the most extreme physical transformation in the game. Its body is enormous and wrong, a mass of flesh and bone that barely resembles the human or animal forms it began from. Fact 415. A variant of the bloodletting beast has a worm emerging from its severed head, suggesting that the transformation goes deep enough to produce parasitic organisms as byproducts. The beast is not just transformed, it has become an ecosystem. Fact 416. The worm in the bloodletting beast is one of several moments where the game suggests that the old blood contains or produces organisms, that what looks like a disease is actually an infestation by something that uses the blood as a medium. Fact 407. This connects to Valter's theory about vermin. If the scourge is partly an infestation by something that lives within blood and flesh, then the beast transformation is less a spontaneous corruption and more a colonization. Fact 413. The dungeons contain the most extreme examples of this because they have been running the longest. Surface Yharnam is a relatively recent experiment. The dungeons have been producing these results for centuries. Fact 419. The depth system for chalices runs from 1 to 5. Depth 5 is the deepest and most dangerous. The game does not explain what depth measures physically, but experientially, depth measures how far from the ordinary world you have travelled. Fact 420. At depth 5, the enemies you encounter no longer feel like they belong to the same game as the surface world. The scale, the design, the damage, it registers differently. The dungeon system is its own world. Chapter 9. The Weapons of the Hunt in Full. Fact 4221. The trick weapon system requires that each weapon have at least 2 distinct modes, a shorter, faster form and a longer, slower form. This constraint produced some of the game's most creative design work. Fact 422. The Kirkhammer is a short sword that conceals an enormous stone sledgehammer head. In its short mode it is elegant and fast. In its transformed mode it is one of the heaviest, slowest tools in the game. The transition is violent and satisfying. Fact 423. The Tonitrus is unique in that its transformation does not change the weapon's shape but electrifies it. The blunt club becomes a lightning-wrapped club. It is the only trick weapon where the trick is elemental rather than structural. Fact 424. The Tonitrus is associated with the dungeons specifically. Its lore describes research into Lauren beast electricity. It is a weapon built from dungeon science, brought to the surface. Fact 425. The Hunter Axe is the starting weapon for high-strength builds, a hatchet that extends into a full poleaxe in transformed mode. It is described as a hunter's weapon of the old school, before the church's influence refined the craft into something more ceremonial. Fact 426. The Threaded Cane's whip mode is one of the strangest base game weapons. A whip in a world of beasts is a statement about the hunter's relationship to the hunt, control and distance rather than immersion and force. Fact 427. The rifle spear combines a trick weapon with a firearm in a single tool. In short mode, it is a cleaver. In transformed mode, it becomes a spear with a built-in rifle barrel at the tip. The practical absurdity of this design is part of its charm. Fact 428. The rifle spear is associated in lore with hunters who preferred engagement at range but found pure firearms insufficient. It is a compromise weapon that reflects an approach to the hunt that prioritizes adaptability. Fact 429. The Rita Palash similarly combines a rapier with a gun. Its transformed mode swaps striking capability for a firing stance. It is a weapon for hunters who think of combat as conversation. When the argument runs out, you shoot. Fact 430. The Rita Palash is Canehurst adjacent in style. It reflects an aristocratic tradition of duelling that the Vilebloods maintained. It is fencing brought into a world where fencing is not quite adequate. Fact 431. The Chikage is the only weapon in the base game that deals blood damage natively in its transformed mode while consuming the hunter's own health. The cost is steep, the damage is extraordinary, the design is the philosophy. Fact 432. Using the Chikage transformed for extended periods will kill you as reliably as any enemy. Learning to use it means learning to finish encounters before the weapon finishes you. The weapon teaches the same lesson the blood teaches. Fact 433. The Stake Driver is a powder keg weapon, a short pile bunker that drives a spike into enemies via compressed air with devastating force. Its charged attack produces the most absurd single hit in the base game. It is engineering in place of craft. Fact 434. The Powder Kegs, as a faction, designed weapons on the principle that more force, more explosively delivered, was the appropriate answer to the Beast Scourge. The Church considered this vulgar. The weapons work. Fact 435. The Boom Hammer is the other major powder keg weapon, a hammer that ignites upon its heavy attack through a gunpowder mechanism built into the head. It deals fire and physical damage simultaneously. It is the most directly beast countering weapon in the game. Fact 436. Ludwig's Holy Blade is the most popular weapon in the game for a reason. It is a long sword concealed inside a greatsword's sheath, and in transformed mode, those two become one enormous two-handed weapon. It has strong scaling, wide arcs, and a moveset that covers most combat situations. Fact 437. The Holy Blade is the weapon Ludwig designed imagining what Gehrman's tools must look like. That the most practically powerful weapon in the game is the product of hero worship and imagination rather than knowledge is a quietly funny detail. Fact 438. The Burial Blade, Gehrman's weapon, is a curved sickle that extends on a pivoting haft in transformed mode. It is fast, has unusual arc patterns, and deals bonus damage to enemies in a transformed state. It was designed to hunt beasts, and it shows. Fact 439. The burial blade is only available after defeating Gehrman. Using it means using the weapon of the man you just killed. Every swing with it is a small act of inheritance. Fact 440. The Blade of Mercy is a small, paired dagger weapon in transformed mode. The Hunters of Hunters used it because speed and precision matter more than power when hunting someone who is also a trained hunter. You need to finish the fight before the other person's training reasserts itself. Fact 441. The Bowblade, a DLC weapon associated with Simon, is a sword in short mode and a bow in transformed mode. It is the only ranged trick weapon in the game and reflects Simon's approach to the hunt. Observe first, engage with precision. Fact 442. Simon's Bowblade lore describes him as a man who came to Yharnam before becoming a hunter. As a researcher, he was made a hunter against his inclinations. The weapon reflects someone who never stopped wanting distance from what the hunt required. Fact 443. The Ligarius's wheel is one of the more unusual trick weapons, a spinning wooden wheel that generates arcane power through its rotation. Its description frames the spinning explicitly as prayer. The weapon is a mobile altar. Fact 444. The Whirligig's Saw, a DLC powder keg weapon, is the most mechanically extreme weapon in the game. Its transformed mode is a circular saw that deals continuous damage while held against enemies. Its damage output in optimal conditions is the highest in the game. It is not subtle. Fact 445. The Amygdalan Arm is a DLC weapon crafted from the literal limb of an amygdala. It deals arcane damage, and its transformed attacks channel something of the Great One's energy. Hitting enemies with a god's arm is exactly as strange as it sounds. Fact 446. The Kos Parasite, mentioned earlier, is technically a weapon that deals no damage in short mode. Its transformed mode creates swarms of arcane tentacles. It is only fully effective with the Milkweed rune equipped. It is the game's most demanding and most thematic weapon. Fact 447. The Beast Claw is a powder keg weapon that equips directly to the hunter's hands, transforming them into clawed weapons. Using it is the most literal expression of the beasthood mechanic. You are choosing to fight like the thing you hunt. Fact 448. With the Beast's Embrace rune equipped, the Beast Claw transforms the hunter's visual appearance, hunching them and changing their animations. This is the game's most extreme version of becoming what you fight, and it is entirely optional. Fact 449. The Church Pick is a DLC weapon that functions as a pickaxe and transforms into a longer extended form. Its lore connects it to the church's early dungeon excavations, before the architecture of the Healing Church was fully established. It is a labourer's tool made into a weapon. Fact 450. The Bloodletter is Brador's weapon, a blunt club that transforms by driving a spike through the hunter's own hand. The transform mode is more powerful. The cost is the weapon makes Brador's ideology legible, the blood comes from inside. You offer yourself. Fact 451. The Rakuyo is Yamamura's weapon, a paired sword and sickle system found at the bottom of the fishing hamlet in the shark-infested waters. The difficulty of reaching it is the game's way of saying that Yamamura earned it. Fact 452. The Rakuyo's lore says the weapon is associated with a master and student, which suggests Yamamura had a teacher whose tradition he carried into Yharnam. That teacher is never identified. The weapon is all that remains of that lineage. Fact 453. Holy Moonlight Sword is the game's most famous secret weapon, hidden inside Ludwig's body. It is a sword that channels lunar arcane energy, transforming from a short sword into an enormous glowing greatsword that fires arcane waves. Fact 454. The Holy Moonlight Sword is described as the most beloved of all church weapons, and as having been lost. Ludwig kept it inside himself, literally, which is the game's darkest pun about the relationship between hunters and what they carry. Fact 455. Each starting weapon and most obtained weapons have 3 gem slots that can be filled with blood gems to modify their statistics. The blood gem system is the game's most complex customization layer, and most players engage with it superficially at best. Fact 456. Blood gems found in the Chalice dungeons are statistically superior to those found on the surface, which creates a practical incentive for engaging with the dungeon system. The best possible version of any weapon requires dungeon investment. Fact 457. Nourishing blood gems, which boost all damage types, are among the most sought after. Their rarity and the specific dungeon configurations required to obtain them reflect the game's general principle that the most powerful things require the most investment. Fact 458. The radial, triangle, waning, and circle gem shapes correspond to specific slots in each weapon, and not all weapons have all shapes. Understanding which gems fit which weapons is a layer of mechanical knowledge the game does not go out of its way to explain. Fact 405.9. The cursed gems, which provide a powerful bonus alongside a penalty, reflect the Chalice dungeon system's cursed modifier at the item level. Power costs something. This is not optional. It is structural. Fact 460. The workshop in the Hunter's Dream where weapons are upgraded using bloodstone shards, twin shards and rocks is managed by the messengers. Why the messengers know how to upgrade weapons, where they acquired this knowledge, is one of the Dream's many unanswered questions. Chapter 10. Every named hunter accounted for. Fact 461. Gehrman's early life before the game's events is not described directly. He appears in the game's world fully formed as the foundational figure of the hunter's craft. Whatever he was before he developed the craft is not recorded. Fact 462. The implication from the abandoned old workshop is that Gehrman worked in a physical space in Yharnam proper before the Dream was established. He had colleagues, students, a life. The Dream preserved the shape of that life without the life itself. Fact 463. Maria's arrival as Gehrman's student is not dated. She came from Canehurst, which the church despised, and Gehrman took her on anyway. This either suggests Gehrman did not share the church's political views, or that the craft had its own rules about recruitment. Fact 464. Maria's skill as a hunter is described as exceptional. The boss fight confirms this. She fights in 3 phases, her speed and precision increasing as her restraint breaks down. The fight is a portrait of someone becoming who they actually are. Fact 465. Her first phase is controlled and technical. Her second phase, when she begins using blood, is more desperate. Her third phase, when she ignites the blood, is the most powerful and also the most abandoned. She has stopped protecting herself. Fact 466. This 3-phase arc mirrors the arc of Bloodborne's hunters generally. The controlled phase ends. Something personal takes over, and then the thing underneath the personal takes over after that. Fact 467. After Maria's death in the boss fight, she can be spoken to if the player returns. She is quiet, does not explain herself, and fades without ceremony. She is done. The conversation the game allows is minimal because she has said everything she needed to say with the fight. Fact 468. Eileen the Crow's backstory is not told in detail. She is old, she has been doing her job for a long time, and she is clearly aware that she is near the end of her capacity to keep doing it. She is the senior practitioner of a thankless discipline. Fact 469. Her crow attire is described as worn by hunters who have adopted the philosophy of natural death, of letting things end. The crow is a death-adjacent bird in many cultural traditions. Eileen wears her philosophy. Fact 470. Eileen's boss fight, if it occurs because the player triggers it through inaction, reveals that she is still dangerous. Old and near the end does not mean diminished. The Hunters of Hunters were selected for a reason. Fact 471. Father Gascoigne's name suggests a church affiliation. Father is a clerical title. He was a church hunter who married and had children, which the game implies is uncommon. The combination of domestic and vocational life is presented as a real thing he valued. Fact 472. The music box his daughter carries is described as playing a song he composed or adopted for his wife. Music as a tie to humanity recurring in the boss fight is the game's most straightforwardly emotional narrative beat. Fact 473. Henrik, Gascoigne's partner, survived the hunt long enough to become dangerous in a different way. He is found as an enemy in Gascoigne's boss arena after completion, wearing hunter attire covered in blood. He has held on too long. Fact 474. Henrik's survival into old age as a hunter is unusual. Most hunters do not make it to old age. That he survived and became corrupt rather than heroic is the game's comment on what extended survival in the craft actually produces. Fact 475. Alfred's zealotry is established in his very first dialogue. He is enthusiastic about the hunt in a way that is slightly too much, a quality the game uses to signal that he is defined by his purpose rather than by broader character. Fact 476. His weapon of choice being the Kirkhammer, the most church-associated starting weapon, reflects his institutional loyalty. He is not a rogue or an eccentric, he is a believer, fully. Fact 477. The tragedy of Alfred is not that he does something wrong exactly. Annalise is a vile blood, and by the church's own moral framework, she deserves what he does. The tragedy is that he has no self outside the framework. When the framework delivers its result, he has nothing. Fact 478. His final dialogue, after completing his goal, is hollow. He thanks you. He says he has completed his purpose, and then there is nothing more to say. The conversation ends because he has ended. Fact 479. Simon the Harrod's blindness is a gift from the church for asking questions. The specific questions are not described, but the fact that they blinded rather than killed him suggests that his questions were not threatening enough to warrant death, just inconvenient enough to warrant silence. Fact 480. His management of blindness in a combat environment is extraordinary. He navigates the hunter's nightmare with enough competence to survive, assist the player, and complete his own arc. The church took his eyes. They could not take what made him a hunter. Fact 481. Ludwig's founding of the church's hunter branch was motivated by genuine idealism. He wanted to systematize the hunt, to give it institutional backing and resources, to make it something more than individual hunters disappearing into the night. Fact 482. That idealism produced a bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy produced the hunter's nightmare, the research hall, Brador, and all the other institutional horrors. Ludwig's organisational genius was at the service of something that eventually broke him. Fact 483. When his memory is restored in his boss fight's second phase, the music changes, and he says, in confusion and relief, that the hunters he hears must be following the old ways. He dies believing the best version of the institution he built is still present. It is not. Fact 484. Brador's arc is the inverse of Alfred's. Alfred completed his purpose. Brador's purpose consumed his identity entirely. He became the task. The beast's skull hood is the most visible expression of this, but the weapon through the hand is the deeper one. Fact 485. The beast whose skull Brador wears was probably someone he knew before the fishing hamlet raid. The wearing of it reads as penance or as identity transfer. Either reading makes him more tragic. Fact 486. Yamamura's origin from the east, a place entirely undefined in the game's geography, suggests a world where the hunt is not unique to Yharnam. Whatever produced him, whatever tradition trained him, was a parallel development in another civilization. Fact 487. Whether the East had its own version of the Old Blood, its own equivalent of the Healing Church, its own scourge, is not addressed. Yamamura is the only window into that world, and he can no longer speak. Fact 488. The hunter known only as the Old Hunter Henriette, found as a friendly summon in a few locations, is identified only by name and gender through her equipment. She represents the anonymous majority of hunters, people who did their job without becoming figures of legend. Fact 489. The Valta questline in the Dealk involves collecting vermin, the small creatures only he can see, by performing visceral attacks on enemies. The collecting is mechanical, but the act of performing visceral attacks, of reaching into an enemy's moment of vulnerability, as a method of purification, is thematically loaded. Fact 490. Valta's disappearance at the end of his questline, if completed, involves him removing the parasite that let him see vermin and losing the ability. What he sees after that, whether the world without the parasite is a relief or a deprivation, he does not say. Fact 491. Ajura's choice to stop hunting and to protect the beasts of Old Yharnam is one of the game's most politically complex positions. He has decided that the line between hunter and hunted is not as clean as the Church insists, and has acted on that decision. Fact 492. He is not presented as correct exactly. He is presented as having arrived at a position through experience and grief, and then having held it consistently. The consistency is what distinguishes him from people who simply gave up. Fact 493. The two unnamed hunters found dead in various locations throughout the game, identified only by their attire and the weapons near them, are the texture of the hunting community. The named hunters are exceptions, the unnamed dead are the rule. Fact 494. The cathedral ward contains several hunter corpses in different states of transformation. They are at different stages. Some look human, some look almost beastly. The ward as a location shows the whole spectrum in proximity. Fact 495. Patches, present in the Nightmare Frontier, carries the tradition of his character across games with a lightness that the grimmer Bloodborne universe almost rejects before. Accepting. He is still Patches. He still tries to kick you into a pit. Fact 496. His continued self-interest in a world where most people's self-interest has been consumed by the hunt or the blood makes him accidentally admirable. He has not transcended anything. He is not trying to. He survives. Fact 497. The doll's development over the course of the game, from formal caretaker to something that seems genuinely pleased by your presence, tracks against the insight you accumulate. As you perceive more, so does she. Fact 498. Whether the doll's increased expressiveness is her becoming more real, or you becoming better at perceiving what was always there, is a question the game will not answer. Both readings are consistent with the evidence. Fact 499. The plain doll's prayer animation, which she performs when you are away from the dream, is its own small mystery. Who does she pray to? What does she ask for? The game has her praying and says nothing more about it. Fact 500. All of the hunters in the game's world, named and unnamed, are people who came to a craft that promised purpose and discovered that purpose has its own cost. They paid in different amounts and in different currencies. The ledger always came out the same. Chapter 11. Architecture, Geography, and the Shape of Yharnam. Fact 501. Yharnam's layout is not random. The high places are the church's places. The cathedral ward is elevated above the rest of the city in a way that makes the architecture itself an argument for the church's position in the social hierarchy. Fact 502. The player descends from the cathedral ward to reach Old Yharnam, and ascends from it to reach the Forbidden Woods, Cainhurst, and eventually the Nightmares. The game's physical movement is always about altitude and what altitude means. Fact 503. The Forbidden Woods are outside the city proper. They are expansive and genuinely labyrinthine in a way that contrasts with Yharnam's dense urban texture. The woods feel ancient and indifferent, where the city feels constructed and decaying. Fact 504. Snakes appear in the Forbidden Woods in large numbers, wrapped around enemies, spawning from bodies. The snake imagery connects to the shadows of Yharnam and to a strain of the game's lore about a different kind of creature associated with old Pumerian worship. Fact 505. The snake people in the woods and the snake pit enemies in the later areas suggest a third faction or creature type that the game's primary framework of beasts and kin does not fully account for. Snakes exist outside the blood's usual transformations. Fact 506. The village in the Forbidden Woods was conducting experiments connected to the church's extended research programs. The caged snakes, the imprisoned villagers, the smell of death that the environment projects. It is a place where something was done that should not have been. Fact 507. The Nightmare version of the research hall, accessible in the DLC, shows the same space transformed by nightmare logic. Patients float toward the ceiling. Gravity is inconsistent. What was an institutional horror is now a cosmological one. Fact 508. The research hall's architecture as a real space before the nightmare suggests a facility built with genuine medical intention. Wards, beds, examination rooms. The transformation of the patients happened incrementally within an ordinary institutional structure. Fact 509. The astral clock tower above the research hall connects the facility to something cosmic. The tower was not part of the original design. It was added, or it appeared, as the experiments progressed. The architecture itself transformed alongside the patients. Fact 510. Cainhurst Castle's inaccessibility in normal gameplay. You need a specific item and a specific location to summon the coach, reflects its social isolation. Cainhurst is not part of Yharnam's world in the functional sense. It is adjacent to it, separated by the church's enmity. Fact 511. The coach that takes you to Cainhurst is driven by an invisible presence and travels through a snowstorm. The journey is atmospheric, in a way that separates Cainhurst from the rest of the game's locations, not just spatially, but experientially. Fact 512. The snow around Cainhurst is permanent and seems disconnected from Yharnam's weather. The castle has its own climate, or the castle exists in a slightly different version of the world than the rest of the game. Fact 513. The lecture hall, which exists in two versions accessible from different parts of the game, is a building that exists partially within a nightmare space. Entering it from the cathedral ward produces a different section of the building than entering from Yharnam. Fact 514. The two sections of the lecture hall connect to different dreams. The lower section connects to the nightmare frontier. The upper section connects to the nightmare of Mensis. The building is an architectural junction between nightmare realms. Fact 515. The Moonside Lake, where Rom is found, is described as existing inside a vision or an illusion maintained by Rom. The lake may not physically exist in the way other locations do. Walking into it is walking into a sustained perceptual event. Fact 516. After Rom is killed, the Moonside Lake area is still accessible, but its sky has changed. The blood moon is now visible. The transformation is not just in Yharnam's streets. It is in the sky above a lake that may not be a real lake. Fact 517. The hunter's dream's physical layout, garden, workshop, grave markers, doll, is small enough to walk across in seconds. For a place that is effectively the hub of the entire game, its intimacy is deliberate. It should feel like a home, not a headquarters. Fact 518. The graves at the back of the dream grow more numerous as the game progresses. The ones present at the start of the game predate the current hunt. Gehrman has been adding to them for a long time. Fact 519. The lanterns that function as the game's fast travel points are described in their item lore as focal points of the hunter's dream, places where the boundary between the dream and the waking hunt is thin. They are not just checkpoints, they are seams. Fact 520. Yahar'gul's architecture before the Mensi scholars took it over was a normal Yharnam district. The statues, the decorative stonework, the building style, it is the same as the rest of the city. The horror was imposed, not built in. Fact 521. The imposing of the horror on an existing ordinary district is more disturbing than if the district had always been that way. The Mensis scholars moved into a neighbourhood. They turned it into a nightmare. The ordinary persists beneath the horror like an accusation. Fact 522. The School of Mensis is the specific building where the ritual was performed. It is a converted mansion, large and institutional in a domestic way. The scale is wrong for what was attempted there. Fact 523. The nightmare counterpart of the School of Mensis is larger, stranger, and surrounded by the effects of the ritual. The strings connecting the brain in the sky to the figures below are one of the game's most visually specific images. Fact 524. Those strings are the ritual connection between the scholars and whatever they were reaching toward. They are holding the contact open. They are also what is holding the scholars in place, unable to return or advance. Fact 525. Old Yharnam, the burned district below the cathedral ward, is not entirely dead. Dura walks its rooftops. Beasts wander its streets. The burning did not end what was there, it just froze it at the moment of its worst crisis. Fact 526. The architecture of Old Yharnam is older and less ornamented than the rest of the city. It predates the cathedral ward's Gothic ambitions. It is Yharnam before the church made the city into its own image. Fact 527. Hints in Old Yharnam's environment suggest it was a functioning district with a specific community before the beast outbreak. The people who became the beasts Dura protects were residents with lives. The burning happened to a neighbourhood, not to a population of monsters. Fact 528. The Hemwick Charnel Lane connects the cathedral ward to Canehurst through a cemetery district. It is full of grave women and blood-obsessed criminals. The road to aristocracy passes through the place where ordinary people are interred. Fact 529. The fishing hamlet in the DL is geographically offshore or isolated in a way that mirrors its isolation from Yharnam's institutional structures. The church got there without integrating it. They arrived, took what they needed, and left the consequence behind. Fact 530. The hamlet's visual design is wetlands and fog and old wood, entirely distinct from Yharnam's stone and iron, a different world with different aesthetic logic, which makes what the church did there feel more like conquest than research. Chapter 12. The Mechanics as Law, when the system is the story. Fact 531. The parry system in Bloodborne, called a counter in other games, fires a gun to stagger enemies before a visceral attack. The gun is not blocking, it is interrupting. The defense is aggressive. This is the game saying something about how hunters survive. Fact 532. The visceral attack itself, the follow-up to a successful parry, drives the hand into the enemy's chest or head and tears something out. It is among the most violent base animations in the game. It is also the most efficient damage delivery the game offers. Efficiency and violence are not separated. Fact 533. The regain system, where taking damage immediately after recovering some of it restores that portion of health, rewards aggression over retreat. Running away from a hit is often more dangerous than pressing forward. The game's mechanics say, go toward the problem. Fact 534. Stamina management in Bloodborne is looser than in earlier Soulsborne titles. Rolls are faster, iframes are more forgiving, the rhythm of combat is quicker. The game feels like a hunter, not a soldier. The loosening was intentional and produced a distinct identity. Fact 535. The rally mechanic, the regain system's name, was introduced in Bloodborne and not carried into later games in the same form. It is specific to this world's logic. Blood that is spilled can be taken back if you act immediately. Nothing is final until you stop moving. Fact 536. Blood vials as a consumable system, rather than Estus as a replenishing flask, change the relationship to healing. You can run out of blood vials. You can farm them from enemies. They are a resource, not a promise. This places healing within the game's economy of scarcity. Fact 537. The fact that healing is also the substance causing the scourge, and that you must farm it from the enemies of the hunt, creates a closed loop the mechanics never call attention to. But the lore confirms hunters sustain themselves on the same blood that will eventually destroy them. Fact 538. Quicksilver bullets as a limited resource separate from blood vials mean that aggressive play costs you something. Parries are powerful, but not free. The gun is there, but firing it has a price. Every aggressive option the game offers comes with a cost. Fact 539. The insight economy runs parallel to the blood echo economy. Blood echoes are spent on character statistics and supplies. Insight is spent on items from the insight shop that are not available otherwise. Knowledge has its own purchases available only to those who have suffered enough to accumulate it. Fact 540. The loss of blood echoes on death, and their recovery from the spot of death mirrors the loss and recovery mechanics of the Souls games, but with a stronger narrative justification. You are not losing XP. You are losing the blood you have accumulated. The blood is you. Fact 541. Death itself in Bloodborne has no permanent consequence beyond the echo loss, because the hunter's dream catches you. This is presented as a gift from the moon presence through Yharnam. It is also a leash. The dream ensures you cannot stay dead. Fact 542. The endgame revelation that you have been a pawn of the moon presence this entire time reframes every death and respawn. Each time you return to the dream, you are returning to a creature's holding space for you. The safety was the captivity. Fact 543. The character statistics, vitality, endurance, strength, skill, blood tinge, arcane, map directly onto the game's ideological factions. Strength and vitality are the church's values, physical power, endurance. Skill and arcane are Byrgenwerth's, precision, knowledge. Blood tinge stands alone, associated with the vile bloods. Fact 544. A player who builds primarily in blood tinge is mechanically choosing the vile blood path. The game does not reward this choice with a special ending or acknowledgement. It simply lets you be that kind of hunter and puts appropriate enemies in your way. Fact 545. The Carol rune system, equipped in memory slots that increase with consumption of Madman's knowledge, is the game's character customization layer below the stat system. It is deeper, more esoteric, and less immediately visible, like the lore itself. Fact 546. The 3 memory slots for runes expand as you absorb knowledge. More capacity for the runes that knowledge unlocks. The system describes the process of becoming someone who can hold more of the world in mind. Fact 5 and 47. The Oath runes, which are covenant-specific, change how the game positions you in relation to other hunters. The Hunter of Hunter's Oath, the Corruption Oath, the League Oath, each changes what you are hunting and why. Fact 548. The Corruption Oath, associated with the Vile Bloods, marks you as a target for executioner hunters. Wearing it in multiplayer means other players with the appropriate covenant will actively seek to kill you. The Covenant system reproduces the game's political conflicts in the multiplayer space. Fact 549. The game's bloodstained messages, left by other players, form an accidental community text. Warnings about enemies ahead, jokes about full damage, hints about secrets. This layer of communication coexists with the total isolation of the hunting experience and makes the isolation feel inhabited. Fact 550. The Chalice Dungeon multiplayer, the ability to share dungeon glyphs so other players can enter your specific dungeon configuration, is the game's closest approach to collective. World building. The best dungeons circulate through community channels. Knowledge shared, costs distributed. Chapter 13. The Cosmic Horror Tradition and where Bloodborne sits in it. Fact 551. Bloodborne's primary literary debt is to H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos and related cosmic horror fiction. The Great Ones are recognizable as Lovecraftian entities, vast, indifferent, cosmically scaled, and capable of driving humans mad through contact. Fact 552. But Bloodborne makes a significant departure from Lovecraft's typical framework. Where Lovecraft's horror often relies on the incomprehensibility of the other producing madness in passive witnesses, Bloodborne's characters actively seek contact with the Great Ones. The horror is partially self-inflicted. Fact 553. Michaelash, Lawrence, Willem, the Mensis scholars, these are not people who stumbled into cosmic horror. They walked toward it. They opened the door and asked what was on the other side. The game asks whether this is folly or simply the human condition. Fact 554. The insight system, which makes the world harder as knowledge increases, is Bloodborne's mechanical answer to Lovecraft's epistemological horror. Knowing more does not protect you. It exposes you to more of what you cannot control. Fact 555. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is another visible influence, particularly in the research hall. Patients experimented on without full consent, in the name of a science that promised more than it could deliver, by an institution that convinced itself the ends justified the means. Fact 556. The Gothic novel tradition, Dracula, Carmilla, the Victorian horror of corrupted blood and nocturnal creatures, is directly legible in the Vile Blood sections. Canehurst Castle is a Dracula set piece. Annalise is a patient, aristocratic vampire. The reference is unsubtle. Fact 557. The body horror tradition, Cronenberg more than any literary figure, is present in the physical transformations. The bloodletting beast, the Thumerian experiments, the patients floating toward the research hall ceiling. These are bodies doing things bodies should not do. Fact 558. The medical horror specifically, the contamination of care by ambition, the hospital as a place of harm rather than healing. This strand connects Bloodborne to a contemporary anxiety about institutions and expertise that gives it currency beyond its fantasy setting. Fact 559. Bloodborne's horror is not primarily about what the Great Ones might do to humanity. It is about what humanity does to itself in pursuit of the Great Ones. The monster is often the institution, not the cosmic entity. Fact 560. This distinction is what separates Bloodborne from a strict Lovecraftian reading. Lovecraft's horror is fundamentally pessimistic about human cognitive capacity. Bloodborne is pessimistic about human institutional behaviour. These are different critiques. Fact 561. The fishing hamlet section, where a community is destroyed so the church can harvest a dead god, is colonialism as horror. The language of the section, the choir arriving, taking, leaving the consequence behind, uses the conventions of cosmic horror to make an argument about institutional violence. Fact 562. Whether this was Miyazaki's explicit intention is not confirmed. He speaks carefully about the game's themes, but the reading is consistent with the evidence and has been argued persuasively by many in the game's interpretive community. Fact 563. The question of who the game positions as its moral centre is complicated. No faction is clean. The Hunters of Hunters are the closest to an institutional conscience, but they operate within a structure that produces what they are correcting. Fact 564. Eileen does not challenge the hunt itself. She corrects its worst practitioners. This is reform, not revolution, and the game is honest about what reform can and cannot do. Fact 565. The game's most radical moral position, if it has one, might be Jura's, that the line between those who hunt and those who are hunted is arbitrary and should be abandoned. But Jura has opted out of the situation entirely, and the game is also honest about what opting out looks like. Fact 566. The three endings, reconsidered in this frame, are not just different personal choices, they are different political positions. Waking outside the dream is opting out. Taking Gehrman's place is taking responsibility for the structure. Becoming a great one is becoming the system itself. Fact 567. None of these is coded as unambiguously heroic. The game does not believe unambiguous heroism is available in its world. This is either despair or realism depending on your temperament. Fact 568. The aesthetic language of Bloodborne borrows from Victorian England, Baroque Europe and Meiji-era Japan, a combination that the game blends without calling attention to the blend. The result is a visual world that feels period-specific without being historically faithful. Fact 569. The Japanese influence is most visible in the dealt weapons, Rakuyo, Shikage, and in Yamamura. The game acknowledges a world beyond its primary Gothic vocabulary without fully exploring it. The East exists as a horizon. Fact 570. The score, composed primarily by Tsukasa Saito, Yuka Kitamura, Nobuyoshi Suzuki, Michael Wanmaker, and Ryan Amon, among others, is one of the largest and most varied soundtracks in the Soulsborne series. The number of composers reflects the game's tonal range. Fact 571. Each major area and boss has its own distinct musical identity. The Cathedral Ward and the Healing Church areas use grand choral and organ music. The beast-heavy areas use hunting horn and percussion. The DLC uses more intimate, grief-oriented arrangements. Fact 572. The music of the Hunter's Dream is the only piece in the game that is consistently gentle. It is a lullaby in a horror game. The deliberateness of this choice makes the dream feel like the place it is supposed to be, refuge, however compromised. Fact 573. The sound design more broadly uses space and silence in ways that amplify dread. Areas go quiet before something large is encountered. The silence after killing a boss, before the next area's ambient track begins, is one of the game's most characteristic moments. Fact 574. The sound of the amygdalae in the Cathedral Ward for players with enough insight is a low, almost subsonic rumble. It is barely audible. This is appropriate. They are not announcing themselves. They were always there. You are only now able to hear them. Chapter 14. The Blood, the Dream, and What Persists. Fact 575. The Old Blood's origin story, traced as far back as the lore permits, points to something beneath Thumerian civilization. The Thumerians found it. They did not make it. Whatever it is, it predates the oldest human civilization in the game's world. Fact 576. Whether the Old Blood is the physical blood of a Great One, or a substance created by Great One presence, or something that has always existed in the earth and Great Ones are drawn to, the game does not decide. All three readings are supported by partial evidence. Fact 577. The blood ministration that foreigners travel to Yharnam for is a diluted, processed version of the Old Blood, filtered through the Church's preparation methods. What reaches the patients in the clinic is far from whatever that the Thumerians were working with. Fact 578. The Church's processing methods were developed to make the blood safer for ordinary people. This implies that the unprocessed Old Blood was not safe for ordinary people, and the Church knew this. The processing is not a refinement, it is a containment measure. Fact 579. The failure modes of the processed blood, the beast scourge, are the Church's carefully managed problem-escaping management. Every beast in Yharnam is a case where the containment failed. Fact 580. The spread of the scourge through bites and contact with beast blood means it is also infectious in the conventional sense. The Old Blood transforms. Beast blood transmits. The distinction between the two pathways has practical implications for how the hunt operates. Fact 581. Hunters are presumably exposed to beast blood regularly. That most hunters do not transform immediately suggests either that their exposure to processed Old Blood provides some protection, or that individual resistance varies significantly. Fact 582. The Beasthood stat tracks the hunter's proximity to transformation. It rises with specific runes and falls with specific behaviours. The game gives you a number for how close you are to becoming what you hunt, and the number is always above 0. Fact 583. The hunter's dream as a space outside the regular transformation timeline may slow or suspend the process for hunters who return to it regularly. This would be another way the moon presence's setup serves its own purposes, keeping the hunter functional for longer than they would otherwise last. Fact 584. The blood echoes, when described as the essence of the hunt crystallized, suggest that the hunting itself produces something. The violence and the survival and the knowledge, these generate a residue that has value in the dream's economy. Fact 585. What the moon presence does with this residue, whether it consumes it, or uses it, or simply collects it, is another open question. The dream is the moon presence's space. The blood echoes that flow through it belong to whatever system the moon presence is running. Fact 586. The plain doll distributing the blood echoes to the character statistics is the most mundane operation in the game, described in the most mundane terms. She gives you what you bring her and the numbers go up. But she is the interface between the hunt's residue and the hunter's capacity. She is the processing mechanism. Fact 587. The doll distributing blood echoes as the mechanism of player progression is the game's most hidden lore beat. She is not just a companion, she is the functional centre of whatever system the dream constitutes. Fact 588. Whether she knows this is unknowable. She thanks you for bringing the echoes. She speaks as if the transaction is a gesture of trust. Maybe it is. Maybe the system is also, genuinely, a relationship. Fact 589. Gehrman's relationship to the moon presence is described as a pact, but never as a willing one in retrospect. He may have entered it willingly. He may have been deceived. He has been in the dream long enough that the distinction may no longer matter to him. Fact 590. The wheelchair is significant. Gehrman is not standing, not active, not maintaining the dream through effort. He is seated, passive, tending the garden when he can. The dream runs itself. He is a figurehead, not an administrator. Fact 591. This makes the moon presence's use of him more disturbing. It does not need him to operate the dream. It keeps him there as the face of an institution he no longer controls, giving hunters someone legible to orient themselves toward. Fact 592. Gehrman's offer to release the player from the dream at the end of the game, to kill them so they wake in the real world, is presented as an act of care. He is offering you the best exit he has available. The fact that the best exit available is death tells you something about the structure he operates within. Fact 593. If you refuse the offer, you fight him. He is not angry, he is resigned. He has offered this before and been refused before. He fights because he must, not because he wants to. The fight is institutional procedure, not personal conflict. Fact 594. The moon presence's appearance at the end of the Gehrman fight, if the umbilical cords have been consumed, is abrupt. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives, a massive tentacled form in the flowers and moonlight, and the fight begins. Fact 595. The moon presence fight is shorter than almost any other final boss fight in the Soulsborne series. The brevity is appropriate. You are not supposed to find this fight narratively climactic. It is a confrontation with the infrastructure. It ends quickly because infrastructure, when exposed, is fragile. Fact 596. The moon presence's attacks include a move that reduces the player's health to 1 hit point. This is the most extreme attack in the game, and it is reserved for the entity that has been running the entire enterprise. The message is not subtle. Fact 597. After killing the moon presence, the transformation into an infant Great One is depicted with minimal ceremony. You collapse. The doll appears. She holds what you have become. The scale of what just happened and the quiet domesticity of the aftermath are the point. Fact 598. The infant Great One that you become has no further agency in the game's events. The transformation removes you from the category of hunter entirely. You have become the thing that hunters serve and are destroyed by. The irony is complete. Fact 599. The doll's final lines, her expression of wonder, her promise to watch over you, are the most hope-adjacent words spoken in the game's main narrative. Whether they constitute hope is a question each player answers for themselves. Fact 600. The hunter's dream existing after the Great One ending, the flowers still growing, Gehrman's chair presumably empty now, suggests the dream continues in some form even without. The moon presence. Whatever the dream actually is, it is more durable than the entity that built it. Chapter 15. Unresolved Threads and the Archaeology of the Incomplete. Fact 601. The pale blood mentioned in the opening note of the game, the thing the player character is described as seeking, is never definitively identified within the game. Possible interpretations include the moon presence, the blood moon, the specific blood type of a Great One, or the player character's own transformed blood by the game's end. Fact 602. Miyazaki has acknowledged the paler blood reference without resolving it. It may be intentionally unresolvable, a question the game asks rather than a mystery it hides the answer to.